This is a compilation of over 3 hours of Resident Evil monster and Tyrant lore explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with the evolution of Resident Evil monsters. Resident Evil's monsters didn't just get scarier over 3 decades. They evolved through 7 distinct biological revolutions that fundamentally changed what bioweapons could do. Every major game introduced a new paradigm, from viral reanimation to parasitic mind control, from adaptive mutation to fungal consciousness networks that literally store human soul. That's why today, I'm breaking down every major evolutionary leap in Resident Evil's monster lineage, and how each one changed the rules of bioweapon development, starting with the virus that created the zombie apocalypse, the T-virus. The T-virus wasn't just Umbrella's first bioweapon, and for something that defined survival horror for 30 years, we've never gotten a coherent explanation for how one retrovirus could mutate every living thing on Earth into completely different monsters. Umbrella researchers discovered the progenitor virus on December 4th, 1966, inside the Ndapaya Kingdom caverns in West Africa. The virus came from a rare flower called the Stairway to the Sun. Tribal legends described kings who ate the flowers and gained superhuman strength and near immortality. Oswell Spencer, Edward Ashford, and James Marcus founded Umbrella Corporation as a pharmaceutical front to weaponize it. Marcus spent 11 years combining progenitor with leech DNA, finally creating the Tyrant virus in September 1977. The goal was simple: rewrite human DNA at the cellular level to create controllable biological weapons. But then you look at what the T-virus actually does. Humans become shambling zombies with destroyed higher brain function but maintained motor control. Dogs become Cerberus units with enhanced aggression and necrotic flesh but retained speed. Reptiles spliced with human DNA become hunters with Kevlar-equivalent skin. Plants become ambulatory carnivores. The same virus produces functional mutations across every biological kingdom. Here's the problem with that. Real retroviruses are species-specific. HIV infects humans. Feline leukemia virus infects cats. They can't jump between mammals and reptiles and plants and insects while producing coherent, weaponizable results in every single case. The T-virus doesn't just infect different species. It generates custom mutations perfectly suited to each organism's existing genome. Umbrella's research files describe this as directed evolution. But no virus could encode that level of genetic programming. The Tyrant T002 proves the contradiction. Every human infected with T-virus loses higher brain function within hours and becomes a mindless zombie. Every single human. But the T002 Tyrant retained near-human intelligence, could follow complex commands, and had enough tactical reasoning to operate the Spencer Mansion's security systems. Umbrella claimed this required a genetic compatibility rate of 1 in 10 million, but never explained what genes made someone compatible, or how the virus preserved intelligence in that one case while destroying it in literally everyone else. Lisa Trevor survived even worse. Kidnapped in November 1967, she was injected with progenitor type B, multiple T-virus strains, and the NE alpha parasite over 30 years. Each virus had a 100% fatality rate in other subjects. She survived all of them, absorbed the NE-alpha parasite completely, and her body spontaneously generated the G-virus. The research files describe her as biologically impossible, but never explain the mechanism that let her integrate incompatible viral strains without dying. That impossibility defined bioweapon development for the next 25 years. Every virus in the franchise descends from progenitor. Every subsequent outbreak traces back to the Arklay Laboratory and Spencer Mansion. And every researcher who came after Marcus spent decades trying to solve the same problem he never could. How do you create a bioweapon that keeps the host intelligent instead of turning them into a rotting corpse? But if the T-virus created uncontrollable monsters, William Birkin found something inside Lisa Trevor that could evolve forever. And unlike the T-virus, it had no theoretical limit to how far it could mutate, the G-virus. William Birkin didn't just improve the T-virus, and after spending 10 years analyzing Lisa Trevor's impossible biology, he created something that could mutate infinitely without any theoretical limit to how far it could evolve. Birkin discovered the Golgotha virus inside Lisa Trevor's body in 1988. She'd absorbed the NE-alpha parasite completely instead of dying like every other test subject. Her cells had spontaneously generated an entirely new virus that granted adaptive, continuous self-evolution. Umbrella Umbrella moved Birkin to the Nest facility beneath Raccoon City to develop it. The G-virus worked through G-cells that fused with host tissue and continuously rewrote DNA. Every injury triggered accelerated mutation. The host would generate new body parts, new organs, new biological structures with zero ceiling on complexity. Birkin spent 10 years perfecting it. On September 22, 1998, the USS Alpha team led by Hunk raided Nest to steal his research. Birkin was shot, injected himself with G-virus, and triggered the Raccoon City outbreak that killed over 100,000 people. But then you see what happened to Birkin himself. He didn't just mutate once. He mutated 5 times in under 12 hours, and each transformation was more complex than the last. G1 form had asymmetrical mutations and a giant eyeball on his shoulder, but retained some memory of his daughter Sherry. G2 form sucked his original head into his chest cavity and grew an entirely new brain. G3 became quadrupedal with 4 arms. G4 could overpower 4 tyrants simultaneously. G5 turned into an uncontrollable blob of flesh that vomited up partially digested zombies. The research files state there were no factors indicating the G creature's evolution was coming to a halt. That's not hyperbole. That's the actual assessment from Umbrella scientists. The virus had no built-in limitations. It would just keep mutating forever, consuming more biomass, generating more complex structures with absolutely nothing to stop it. Simultaneously, Umbrella Europe solved the intelligence problem through a completely different method. The Nemesis, T-02, was a T-103 tyrant with the NE-alpha parasite implanted in its brain. The parasite replaced the host's destroyed neural tissue and grew into an enlarged brain structure. The result could speak target names, use rocket launchers, follow complex tactical commands, and infect other organisms with parasite offspring. It wore a bulletproof coat that doubled as a physical restraint because even Umbrella knew it was too dangerous to deploy without failsafes. Here's what breaks the established rules. The G-virus generates increasingly complex mutations with no energy source. Real biological processes require proportional energy input. Birkin's mass increased by approximately 400% between G1 and G5 with zero external fuel. His body was creating tissue, organs, skeletal structures, and functional nervous systems from nothing. The laws of thermodynamics don't allow that. And Nemesis retained human-level intelligence through a parasitic organism that consumed and replaced the host's original brain. A genetically engineered parasite produced cognition, sophisticated enough for weapon proficiency, target prioritization, and mission persistence across multiple encounters. No biological explanation is provided for how parasite neurons could replicate human reasoning. The Raccoon City incident proved that self-evolving bioweapons couldn't be controlled. Birkin exceeded every parameter Umbrella designed. The city was sterilized with an experimental thermobaric missile on October 1st, 1998. But if Birkin couldn't control his mutations, Alexia Ashford had already solved that problem 15 years earlier. She found a way to keep the intelligence, keep the power, and mutate at will instead of being consumed by the virus. T. Veronica. T. Veronica wasn't just another virus variant, and after Alexia Ashford injected herself at age 12 and spent 15 years in cryogenic sleep, she woke up with something no bioweapon had ever achieved: complete control over her mutations. Alexia created T. Veronica in the early 1980s at Umbrella's Antarctic base. She was a child prodigy, the result of Project Code. Veronica, where her father Alexander cloned their ancestor Veronica Ashford's DNA to restore the family's declining reputation. Alexia combined the progenitor virus with an ancient retrovirus extracted from a queen ant's genome and added plant genes to fill sequencing gaps. The breakthrough was the ant colony model. Queen ants release chemical properties that make worker ants subservient. Alexia engineered the virus to create the same hierarchy in infected hosts. A successful T. Veronica host becomes the queen, controlling all lower-ranking infected like soldiers in an insect army. The catch was timing. Without preparation, T. Veronica overwhelmed the brain instantly and destroyed all cognitive function. Alexia discovered the solution through mathematical modeling. If viral integration happened slowly enough, the host's neural tissue could adapt gradually instead of being consumed. She injected herself in February 1983 and entered cryogenic stasis. 15 years later, in late 1998, she awakened. The virus within her body had mutated into a distinct substrain researchers called T. Alexia. She retained complete human intelligence, could shift between 3 controlled mutation forms, commanded subordinate infected through chemical signals, and her blood was literally flammable. But then you examine what happened to every other T. Veronica test subject. Alexander Ashford was the first human trial. Alexia and her twin brother Alfred used him as revenge after discovering they were clones. No incubation, no preparation, just immediate injection. His brain deteriorated within hours. He grew insect appendages from his spinal cord, generated a naturally incurable poison, and spent 15 years imprisoned beneath the Antarctic base as a mindless creature called Nosferatu. Steve Burnside was infected with the T. Alexia strain during the Code Veronica incident in December 1998. He mutated into a massive creature with green skin and overgrown spine, briefly retained enough independent thought to resist attacking Claire Redfield, then died. The research files claim cryogenic stasis allowed gradual viral neural symbiosis over 15 years. That sounds scientific until you realize cryogenic stasis halts all biological processes. Freezing tissue prevents cellular activity entirely. A virus cannot integrate with neural tissue at any speed if cellular metabolism is stopped. The explanation requires the virus to somehow adapt, while biological time is frozen. And T. Veronica incorporated genes from 3 separate biological kingdoms: queen ant genes for hierarchical control, plant genes for structural stability, and progenitor viral RNA for the mutation framework. Cross-kingdom gene expression is extraordinarily difficult, even in modern genetic engineering. The idea that a 12-year-old in the 1980s could create functional genetic programs using ant, plant, and viral DNA that produces flammable blood and insect colony telepathy is beyond theoretical possibility. Alexia's success proved controlled mutation was achievable. Every bioweapons researcher after Code, Veronica tried to replicate her results. Wesker recovered Steve Burnside's body and extracted the T. Alexia strain. That sample would later be combined with G-virus material to create the C-virus, the most versatile bioweapon in franchise history. T. Veronica's genes influenced bioweapon development for the next 15 years, but T. Veronica still required remaking the host at the cellular level. Beneath a Spanish castle, something far older had been controlling humans for centuries without changing their biology at all. And unlike every virus before it, the hosts stayed alive, stayed intelligent, and stayed loyal. Las Plagas. Las Plagas didn't use a virus at all, and after researchers unsealed Spanish mountain caves in the early 2000s, they discovered ancient parasitic arthropods that could turn an entire village into obedient soldiers without destroying a single brain cell. Las Plagas are parasitic organisms endemic to a remote Spanish region, possibly dating back to the Bronze Age around 2200 BC. Desiccated plaga remains were also found in Endopaya Kingdom ruins in West Africa, suggesting intercontinental origins that predate recorded history. Count Gregorio Salazar led a crusade against ancient ganados centuries ago and sealed surviving plagas in caves beneath his fortress. Osmond Sadler, descendant of the original banished cultists, manipulated the 8th Castellan Ramon Salazar into breaking the seal. The plagas themselves had died, but microscopic spores preserved in amber deposits remained viable. Miners inhaled them, and new parasites grew inside their bodies. The revolutionary capability was complete behavioral control without physical mutation. Hosts remained alive, conscious, and physically intact. The parasite attached to the spinal cord and exerted neurochemical influence over behavior. Infected villagers retained language, weapon proficiency, and tactical coordination. They could follow complex group commands, set ambushes, and operate heavy machinery, but they had zero free will. Every action was dictated by the parasitic hierarchy. But then you examine the biological mechanism. Real parasites like Toxoplasma gondii can alter host behavior, but only subtly. They make rats less afraid of cats by affecting specific neural pathways. They cannot create obedient soldiers who coordinate tactical assaults, use firearms, and follow mission parameters while maintaining full speech capability. The neurochemical influence required to override every aspect of human volition, while preserving every cognitive skill, has no biological parallel. The plagas operated through a 3-tier hierarchy. Subordinate species stripped free will entirely but preserved all motor and language functions. Dominant species, possessed only by osmosis, spokesman Sadler, allowed the host to retain full intelligence and remotely control all subordinate infected hosts through ultrasonic communication. Superior Species, introduced in the RE4 remake, was an engineered variant ensuring control by dominant hosts while allowing combat transformations. The hierarchy created instant armies where one commander could coordinate hundreds of soldiers telepathically. Regeneradores demonstrated the most extreme Plaga application. Multiple parasites implanted into a single human body produced the strongest healing factor in franchise history. They could regenerate lost limbs, destroyed organs, and severed heads in seconds. Their bodies became strangely elastic and nearly bulletproof. The only kill method was destroying all resident Plagas simultaneously via infrared scope targeting, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. No explanation exists for how three separate parasitic organisms coordinate to regenerate host tissue faster than any BOW before them. The amber added another layer of impossibility: fossilized tree resin containing a unique dormant Plaga specimen, introduced in RE4 Remake's Separate Ways DLC. Even while suspended in solid amber for potentially centuries, it could influence nearby Plagas and exhibited properties matching the dominant species. Luis Serra Navarro discovered it, Sadler confiscated it, and Ada Wong's entire mission centered on retrieving it. The ability to transmit control signals through fossilized resin and solid rock violates every principle of biology and physics. Las Plagas proved that mind control was more valuable than mutation. Subsequent bioweapon development prioritized behavioral control over physical transformation. Tricell engineered Type 2 and Type 3 Plaga variants for RE5's Magini. The Nemesis project had attempted parasitic augmentation a decade earlier, but Las Plagas proved nature had already perfected the concept. Albert Wesker and Ada Wong both secured Plaga samples, ensuring the technology proliferated to black markets and rival corporations worldwide. But Las Plagas controlled individual. Wesker wanted to control evolution itself, and in the West African caverns where progenitor virus was first discovered, he engineered a virus designed to judge every human on Earth and determine who deserved to survive: Ouroboros. Ouroboros wasn't designed to create monsters or control minds, and after Albert Wesker spent 3 years developing it in the same West African caverns where progenitor was discovered, he built a virus that would judge every human being's genetic worthiness and force evolutionary selection on a global scale. Wesker killed Oswell Spencer in 2006 and learned the truth about Project Wesker, Spencer's eugenics program to create a superior human race. Wesker decided to complete Spencer's vision himself. Working with Tricell Corporation executive Excella Gione, he established laboratories in the Ndapaya Kingdom caverns, where the stairway to the sunflower produced progenitor virus decades earlier. The problem was progenitor's lethality. Compatible human population was vanishingly small, maybe one in millions. Wesker's solution was using T-virus antibodies extracted from Jill Valentine. She'd been infected during Raccoon City, developed antibodies, and Wesker kept her in cold sleep as a test subject after capturing her between RE3 and RE5. He repeatedly applied her antibodies to Ouroboros cultures, naturally selecting less lethal but still potent strains through thousands of failed attempts. The result was a binary judgment mechanism. Compatible hosts with rare advantageous genes achieved stable superhuman enhancement. Enhanced speed, strength, regeneration, ceased aging, potential immortality. Incompatible hosts, the vast majority of humanity, were consumed by writhing black tentacles that devoured the body and absorbed surrounding organic material into growing biomass. Wesker planned atmospheric dispersal via missiles. Billions would die. A genetic elite would survive and inherit the Earth. But then you examine the mechanism. A virus cannot test genetic worthiness. Viruses interact with cellular machinery through receptor binding and gene expression. They don't evaluate abstract fitness or make binary decisions about evolutionary potential. The Ouroboros outcome, evolve or be consumed, would require impossibly complex decision trees encoded in viral RNA. No genetic program could assess a host's entire genome and determine worthiness within seconds of infection. RE5 also revealed the deep history connecting every franchise virus. The Ndapaya tribe built a massive underground civilization around Stairway to the Sunflowers. Tribal kings were selected by consuming the flowers. Survivors gained superhuman abilities, enhanced strength, intellect, near immortality. Legends described a single king reigning for centuries. The kingdom fell when mutant animals escaped containment. This proves progenitor-created superhuman societies thousands of years before Umbrella existed, yet somehow had zero impact on recorded human history until 1966. Tricell used Las Plagas samples post-RE4 to engineer Type 2 and Type 3 variants. Type 2 plagas invaded orally, attached to the medulla oblongata, and matured in seconds. Type 3 plagas spliced dominant genes into subordinate plaga for enhanced physical abilities, but had 92% male-only compatibility and 0% compatibility in women and children. No biological explanation exists for sex-specific parasite rejection at those rates. Ouroboros aheri demonstrated the virus consuming incompatible hosts. Excella Gione was transformed after Wesker betrayed her. Her body dissolved into black tentacular masses that absorbed corpses in the ship's hold, growing into an enormous creature. When Wesker himself was destabilized by an overdose of PG67A/W serum, he deliberately infected himself with Ouroboros. Tentacles fused onto both arms and absorbed metallic debris into weapons. He retained consciousness and control because he was genetically compatible, unique among observed hosts. He lost his superhuman agility, but gained immense offensive power. Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar killed him with 2 RPGs in volcanic lava. Jill Valentine's role raises the central contradiction. Her T-virus antibodies supposedly helped create Ouroboros by allowing natural selection of less lethal strains. But antibodies neutralize viruses. They bind to viral particles and mark them for immune destruction. Using antibodies as a template for engineering new viral capabilities has no real-world precedent. The mechanism is never explained beyond vague references to repeated exposure and strain selection. Ouroboros represented the apex of progenitor-derived viral ambition. Wesker tried to force evolution on a planetary scale. His death and Tricell's collapse proved that viral bioweapons had reached a philosophical dead end. They were too lethal, too uncontrollable, and too binary to serve practical military purposes. But Wesker tried to judge humanity with a single virus. Carla Radames built something far more versatile, a virus that could turn one soldier into an army of entirely different creatures, adapting in real time to any battlefield condition, with mutations that appeared seconds after injury. The C-virus. The C-virus didn't just combine previous bioweapons, and after Carla Radames spent over a decade engineering it, she created something that could mutate in real time during combat, turning wounded soldiers into entirely new organisms seconds after taking damage. Carla developed the chrysalid virus under Derek C. Simmons, head of the family, a secret organization controlling Western governments. The engineering process spanned approximately 11 years. Step 1 used a base progenitor and T-virus variant around 2001. Step 2 incorporated T. veronica genes acquired from Manuela Hidalgo around 2002, creating the T02 strain that eliminated the 15-year cryogenic incubation requirement. Step 3 combined T02 with G-virus samples extracted from Sherry Birkin's blood, where trace weakened G-virus remained after the devil vaccine. The 3 viruses formed the C-virus. Step 4 used blood from Jake Muller, Albert Wesker's son who inherited viral-resistant genetics, to create the enhanced C-virus that bypassed the chrysalid metamorphosis stage entirely. Only 3 enhanced samples were ever produced. The revolutionary capability was adaptive battlefield mutation. Hosts called Javo, Serbian for devil, retained human intelligence and weapon proficiency, but when injured, the wounded body part spontaneously mutated into combat adaptations within seconds. Arms became blades called Rukasarpi legs, transformed into insectoid appendages called Nogalet. Heads sprouted protective shields or moth-like wings. The mutations were named in Serbian and appeared instantly at injury sites. When cumulative damage exceeded thresholds, the host entered a chrysalid cocoon and underwent complete metamorphosis into an entirely new organism called a complete mutation species. But then you examine the biological mechanism. Real-time adaptive mutation in response to injury would require the virus to instantaneously detect damage location, select appropriate genetic programs from some impossible library, grow entirely new tissue types like wings or armor plating, integrate them with existing nervous and circulatory systems, and make everything functional in seconds. This is the most biologically impossible mechanism in the entire franchise. Derek Simmons exploited Carla for Project Ada. After 12,234 failures, her genetic makeup proved compatible with chrysalid metamorphosis. She was transformed into a near-perfect clone of Ada Wong. When she realized her identity had been stolen, Carla founded Neo Umbrella and orchestrated bioterror attacks across Edonia in December 2012 and Lanxiang, China in June 2013. Simmons was forcibly infected with enhanced C virus during the Lanxiang incident. He retained consciousness and could shift between forms. His mutations included a centaur beast form, a Tyrannosaurus-like dinosaur form, with a circular mouth containing a giant eyeball inherited from G-virus traits, a scorpion form after absorbing zombie biomass, and a final fly form. He violated conservation of mass, unless explained by continuous absorption of external organic material. Ustanak represented the C-virus's pinnacle of controlled intelligence retention, a former prisoner who voluntarily submitted to infection on June 22, 2011. He was the 323rd candidate and the only survivor, retained full intelligence, unique among test subjects. His right arm was lost in a lab accident and replaced with interchangeable cybernetic prosthetics, including chain guns, hydraulic claws, drills, shotguns, and flails. He generated bat-like scout creatures called Oko from a bioorganic system grafted to his back. Named from Serbo-Croatian for revolution, he served as Neo Umbrella's relentless pursuer, the spiritual successor to Nemesis. Chrysalid metamorphosis breaks every rule of embryonic development. Complete mutation species emerged from cocoons as fully formed organisms. Nepad appeared as armored gorilla brutes. Masets were flying crow-spider hybrids. Gnezdo was a swarm of insects forming humanoid shapes. The process required dissolving the entire host body and reforming as something completely different in minutes. No genetic program could encode instructions for running a complete embryonic development cycle at that speed. And the C-virus created both mindless zombies via gas dispersal and intelligent Javo via injection using the same pathogen. Two completely different mechanisms triggered solely by delivery method. A gaseous C-virus destroyed higher brain function, like T-virus. Injected C-virus preserved intelligence and enabled adaptive mutations. No explanation exists for how one virus produces opposite neurological outcomes, based purely on administration route. The C-virus represented the culmination of Umbrella lineage viral engineering. It combined T. veronica's controlled intelligence, G-virus's adaptive mutation, and T-virus's mass infection capability into one pathogen. Its extreme versatility also revealed the fundamental limits. Too unstable, too unpredictable, too easily weaponized by rogue actors like Carla. Neo Umbrella's attacks proved bioweapon proliferation had exceeded any organization's control capacity. But every bioweapon so far required laboratories, viral engineering, and genetic manipulation. In a Louisiana bayou, a 10-year-old girl carried something that didn't need labs or viruses. It just needed to touch you, absorb your cells, and replace them with something that looked exactly like you but wasn't. The mold. The mold wasn't a virus or a parasite. And after Eveline infected the Baker family in October 2014, she proved that a fungal organism could do everything viruses did while adding one capability no bioweapon had ever achieved, storing human consciousness indefinitely. The mold is a hyper-evolved fungus, originating from an Eastern European mountain range. Specifically, a massive supercolony called the Megamycete. The Connections, a criminal syndicate, obtained samples in the 1990s with assistance from Wesker's HCF organization. They engineered E-type bioweapons using mutamycete genomes introduced into pre-stage 4 human embryos. The genome bonded only with female embryos. All male subjects died. Series A through C were unviable. D-Series produced 8 prototypes named Dana, Dahlia, Darlene, Dorothy, Dolores, Diana, Daniela, and Doris. All failed through death, homicide, or poor performance. A-001, Eveline was the first stable subject, created in 1999 using mold from Mother Miranda, plus DNA from Miranda's deceased daughter Eva. Eveline's control mechanism used pheromone-based quorum sensing. She secreted mold through vomiting or skin contact, broadcasting commands through mold deposits using chemical signals similar to bacterial autoinducer molecules. 3-phase infection, initial mold propagation using host nutrients, progressive cellular takeover, and full mental control via psychic link. The tanker SS Annabelle wrecked in a Louisiana hurricane on October 5, 2014. Jack Baker rescued Eveline and Mia Winters from the bayou on October 10th. The Baker family was infected over approximately 2 weeks. But then you examine what the mold actually replaced. Jack Baker's cells were substituted with fungal imitations that granted extraordinary regeneration. He survived dismemberment, gunshots, and immolation. His tissue wasn't mutated. It was replaced entirely by fungus-mimicking human cells. The molded weren't reanimated corpses. They were mobile colonies of mold constructed from biomass. Corpses fed to the mold provided fuel to build filaments. Enough mold in an area could form a molded without any body at all. Marguerite Baker gained the ability to produce and control mutant insects hatched from mold. Her mutated form featured elongated, spindly limbs, an insect hive within her lower torso, and behavior resembling an insect queen. The insects were secondarily infected because they weren't directly infected by Eveline. She couldn't control them directly, proving the hierarchical control had limitations. Lucas Baker was freed from Eveline's control by the connections using a serum in exchange for spying. He was a psychopath before infection. He trapped a childhood bully in the attic and left him to starve. He maintained the pretense of being controlled while building elaborate death traps and eventually betraying the connections entirely. Here's what breaks every biological rule. Psychic control via fungus has no mechanism. Real fungi use basic chemical signaling for colony coordination. The mold's ability to induce specific hallucinations, control complex behavior, and maintain telepathic links across miles is science fiction. No fungal network could produce human-level directed psychic communication or selective memory manipulation, and consciousness transfer is functionally supernatural. No biological mechanism exists for storing human consciousness, memories, personality, and identity in fungal biomass. Yet the mold preserved Jack Baker's sanity within the hive mind. He appeared to Ethan Winters in a vision, explaining the family were innocent victims. The implication is clear. The mold doesn't just control minds, it absorbs them and keeps them alive inside itself. The revelation from R.E. Village makes it worse. Ethan Winters was killed by Jack Baker at the start of RE7. The mold reconstituted his entire body from fungal matter while preserving his consciousness, identity, relationships, and ability to father a biological child. Ethan was dead. The person who rescued Mia, defeated Eveline, and saved his daughter was a walking colony of fungus that believed it was human. The mold rendered every viral bioweapon obsolete. It could mutate, regenerate, control minds, and fabricate biomass from nothing, and it stored souls. Every subsequent bioweapon development couldn't compete with an organism that made death optional. But Eveline was a weapon built from the mold. The mold itself came from something far older beneath an Eastern European village, and the woman who discovered it in 1919 had been using it to play God for over a century. The megamycete. The megamycete wasn't just the source of the mold, and after Mother Miranda discovered it beneath an Eastern European village in 1919, she spent over a century proving that every bioweapon in Resident Evil's history traced back to a fungal superorganism that stores human souls. Miranda found the megamycete after her daughter Eva died from the Spanish flu pandemic. It was an enormous ancient fungal colony shaped roughly like a human fetus, buried deep beneath the mountain village, with countless mold tendrils extending through rock and soil. Any organism making physical contact had its genetic code and consciousness assimilated. The megamycete functioned as a massive biological consciousness database containing thousands of human minds accumulated over millennia. In the early 1950s, Miranda mentored a young British medical student named Oswell E. Spencer. His fascination with the megamycete's regenerative and psychoactive properties directly inspired the founding of Umbrella Corporation. This means Mother Miranda is indirectly responsible for every T-virus zombie, every G-virus mutation, every bioweapon event in the entire franchise. Miranda's primary weapon was the Cadu, Romanian for gift, a parasitic nematode altered by the mold, easier to administer than raw mold infection. Cadu implantation produced wildly divergent mutations based on host compatibility. The same parasite created vampiric blood drinking in Lady Dimitrescu, electromagnetic manipulation in Carl Heisenberg, aquatic transformation in Salvatore Moreau, and psychic hallucination abilities in Donna Beneviento. 4 hosts, 1 parasite, completely different results. But then you examine Lady Dimitrescu's daughters. They weren't human. Miranda implanted Cadu into 3 female corpses. The Cadu produced fly-like organisms that consumed the corpse's flesh, assimilated their DNA, and merged to mimic human shapes. Bella, Daniela, and Cassandra were insect swarms that could dissolve and reform at will. They had memories, personalities, and familial bonds, despite being fungal constructs piloting swarms of flies wearing human faces. Carl Heisenberg's electromagnetic abilities have zero biological basis. The Kadu granted him ferrokinetic powers that let him manipulate metal objects at range and build an army of cyborg corpse hybrids called soldats. Types included Eins with 1 drill arm, Zwei with 2 drill arms, jet variants with jetpacks, Panzer models with heavy armor, and Sturm units with propeller chainsaw heads. The Haller version 1.01 had cranial headgear to stimulate brainwaves for labor tasks, but had zero combat capability. During testing, a single lichen killed and devoured 1 in 3 minutes. The Four Lords demonstrated the Kadu's fundamental impossibility. One parasite produces completely different supernatural abilities in different hosts. Real parasites produce predictable, not wildly divergent, effects. Compatibility is invoked constantly, but no mechanism is provided. How does a nematode generate electromagnetic fields in one person and psychic pollen in another? RE4 remakes separate ways. DLC connected Las Plagas to this web. The amber, fossilized tree resin containing a unique ancient Plaga specimen became Ada Wong's primary objective. Even while dormant in amber, it could influence nearby Plagas. Mother Miranda's insignia appeared in the Spanish village, suggesting her influence extended to Las Plagas research decades before RE4. Luis Serra Navarro discovered the amber. Sadler confiscated it. In the DLC's ending, Ada refused to deliver it to Wesker after learning his plan would cost billions of lives. Wesker instead collected Krauser's corpse for dominant Plaga extraction, declaring the age of man will soon end. Rose Winters represents something entirely new. Born to 2 mold-infected parents, Ethan and Mia, she possesses innate mold powers. In the Shadows of Rose DLC, set in 2037, 16-year-old Rose enters a Megamycete Fragment's consciousness realm. She encounters remnants of Miranda and Eveline, preserved as consciousnesses. She has supernatural mold control and freezing calcification abilities. Rose is proof that mold infection creates heritable genetic traits. Here's the central contradiction. How did Ethan, a mold construct with no living cells, father a biological child? How does fungus produce heritable genetics? Rose's existence implies the mold doesn't just mimic life, it creates it. And if the Megamycete stores consciousness indefinitely, then death isn't final in the Resident Evil universe anymore. Every victim absorbed by the mold still exists inside the network. Miranda's century of research produced only the Kadu and Four Lords, but Spencer's Umbrella lineage generated T-Virus, G-Virus, T-Veronica, and Ouroboros within 40 years using only progenitor. If Miranda had access to the Megamycete since 1919, why did she need the connections in the 1990s to make progress? The timeline creates a paradox where the student surpassed the teacher using inferior source material. The Megamycete recontextualized the entire franchise. It's the "you are organism." Miranda is the researcher. Spencer was her student. Every zombie, every mutation, every parasite traces its lineage to Miranda's 1919 discovery. The Kadu's variable mutations represent the logical endpoint of bioweapon unpredictability, and Rose Winters, as a natural-born mold hybrid, represents an evolutionary successor to humanity born from the franchise's accumulated biological chaos. Resident Evil 9 releases February 27, 2026. The new bioweapon Elpis connects to the Raccoon City sterilization strategy. Zombies retain human memories. The franchise appears poised to circle back to its viral origins while incorporating consciousness preservation capabilities pioneered by the mold. The evolution continues. If you enjoyed breaking down the biological evolution of Resident Evil's monsters, subscribe for more deep dives into gaming lore that actually makes sense of the chaos. Resident Evil's world is filled with terrifying giants born from viral experiments gone wrong, monsters that reshape the landscape of horror and bioweapon warfare. From the very beginning, these colossal creatures tested the courage and resourcefulness of iconic heroes, pushing survival to its limits. Let's rewind to one of the earliest and most sneaky threats lurking in the shadows, a twisted experiment that turned a simple creature into a deadly mansion guardian. Yawn. You don't expect to get stopped by a giant mutant snake inside a creepy old mansion. But that's exactly what Yawn is, one of Umbrella's earliest bioorganic weapons, bred from a simple snake infected with the IT virus in the Arklay laboratory, designed as a sort of environmental security, Yon wasn't just a beast, it was a living door block. Players first face it lurking in tight mansion corridors, forcing Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine to manage scarce ammo and escape routes carefully. Before you roll your eyes at a snake boss, hear me out. Yon wasn't just there for show. As a prototype for more terrifying weapons, it tested how these creatures could be integrated into the mansion itself as living obstacles in the early survival horror setup. It's big, slow, and its mouth yawns wide before lunging, hence the name, which sounds more sleepy than deadly, but definitely isn't. Yon's biggest weakness? It thrives in cramped quarters but struggles against ranged acid rounds. If you can hit it from afar, it's manageable. This vulnerability underscores Umbrella's experimental approach at the time. Reckless, casual, and a bit slapdash with their weaponized monsters. They were more interested in seeing what worked and what broke rather than building the perfect killing machine yet. So Yon stands as the foundation of the mansion's monster horrors, big enough to be intimidating but still a clear step before Umbrella's subsequent escalation to more deadly creations. If you think a giant snake blocking a hallway is scary, wait until you meet Tyrant T002, the laboratory's so-called ultimate life form. Tyrant T002 to Tyrant T0 Bio is the grim poster child of Umbrella's early bioweapon ambitions, the very first successful humanoid Tyrant prototype created deep within the Arclay laboratory. This towering brute wasn't just muscle, it was Umbrella's attempt to build the ultimate life form, a weapon combining overwhelming strength with just enough intelligence to be remotely controlled. But here's the twist. It walks around with its heart fully exposed on its chest. That glaring weakness is both a practical Achilles' heel and a bold sign of Umbrella's hubris, daring anyone close enough to exploit it. When players face Tyrant T02 in the Mansion Incident Climax, it's the ultimate boss showdown. Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine battle this relentless behemoth in a tense fight where raw power clashes with desperate strategy. And yes, the legendary rocket launcher moment blasting the exposed heart has become a defining symbol of Resident Evil's high-stakes monster fights. The Tyrant isn't just a mindless brute, it shows limited intelligence, able to track and aggressively pursue its prey, hinting at the battlefield adaptability perfected later by the mass-produced T103 Tyrants. But here's the kicker. Despite its crushing presence, the exposed heart means Tyrant isn't unstoppable. Umbrella designed a fail-safe kill switch right into their ultimate life form. It's both a safety net and a glaring design flaw, showing how their creations teeter on the edge of disaster. That overconfidence fuels the tension in the final fight. The giant dominates, but a well-placed shot to the heart brings it all crashing down. Narratively, Tyrant T02 sets the stakes for everything after, embodying Umbrella's peak viral ambition and reckless edge. It proves humanoid tyrants are possible, paving the way for the terrifying bioorganic wave that floods Raccoon City. If you think Tyrant's a one-off freak, wait till you meet the mutated scientist who pushes viral evolution to terrifying new limits. William Birkin G-Phase. William Birkin is the tragic face of scientific hubris in Resident Evil, a brilliant Umbrella scientist who gambled with his own life by injecting himself with the experimental G-Virus. Unlike the more controlled T-Virus, this mutant virus drives runaway evolution within the host's body, triggering a horrifying cascade of transformations that push Birkin from man to monster. The results are gruesome, unpredictable, and deadly. The G-Virus doesn't just create one mutation, it triggers a sequence of monstrous forms, known as G1 through G5, each one more grotesque and dangerous than the last. Early on, Birkin's mutated body still holds faint traces of humanity, recognizable limbs, facial features, and vulnerable weak points like oversized, bulging eyes or exposed organs. The game cleverly exploits this. They're your target to slow down the creature's progress, but as Birkin advances to later stages, all traces of his mortal self are lost. The G4 form abandons the classic bipedal stance in favor of a quadrupedal, bestial frame, and by his final G5 form, he's degraded even further into a lumbering, amorphous mass piled with tentacles and jaw-like appendages. You're facing a bioengineered nightmare, pure primordial rage, driven by a virus that doesn't just mutate, it evolves uncontrollably. Birkin is central to the Raccoon City outbreak, becoming the undead embodiment of Umbrella's catastrophic failures. He's not just a mindless bow, he's a tragic villain, a father whose obsession with his creation dooms his family and the entire city. Fighting Birkin isn't a simple boss battle. It's a battle of adaptation where your weapons and tactics have to evolve as he morphs, forcing you to stay one step ahead through multiple phases, each with different attack patterns and weaknesses. Mechanically, Birkin's earlier forms reward precision shooting to exposed weak points, but later the fight shifts into a high-pressure endurance test. No single weak spot, just raw durability that demands sustained fire and smart positioning. This contrasts sharply with controlled tyrants like the T-02, highlighting the J-Virus's shift from engineered bioweapon to uncontrollable force of nature. Birkin's story shows the dark underbelly of bioweapon escalation. The progression from Tyrants to G-Forms marks a turning point where Umbrella goes beyond neat, manageable monsters into unpredictable viral evolution, monsters that can't be controlled, only survived. It's corporate betrayal and mad science fused into flesh. And if you think a morphing mad scientist is bad, wait until you meet the relentless Nemesis T-Type. Next, Nemesis T-Type. Nemesis isn't just another Tyrant variant. It's Umbrella Europe's brutal answer to a huge problem. How do you make a bioorganic weapon not just strong, but smart and adaptable? The solution? Slap an NE alpha parasite inside a T-103 Tyrant host, resulting in a horrifying hybrid with enhanced intelligence and a terrifying mission focus. Hunt down Jill Valentine relentlessly through the streets of Raccoon City. Before you brush this off as just another monster chase, hear me out. Nemesis isn't your typical mindless biological brute. The parasite upgrades its cognition and autonomy, allowing it to strategically wield multiple weapons and change tactics on the fly. This isn't just raw strength, it's a calculated predator. Unlike earlier tyrants that stumble forward blindly, Nemesis stalks you like a ruthless hunter that learns from every encounter. Its mutation phases only ramp things up. Starting as a grotesquely restrained humanoid with a massive right arm, Nemesis morphs through terrifying forms, covered in tentacles and extra limbs, turning into an almost alien abomination. Each transformation increases its lethality and allows more brutal attacks, combining raw power with rapid adaptability. The city streets become a terrifying maze of tension as you dodge ambushes and juggle survival, always a step behind a monster designed to hunt you specifically. But here's where it gets really interesting and complicated. Nemesis doesn't have a clear single weak point like some earlier tyrants with exposed hearts. Instead, its parasitic core is hidden and protected, meaning you have to exploit its biology on a deeper level. Shoot the tentacles, dodge the weapons, and attack the parasite when it finally shows itself. It rewards knowledge and tactical patience, not just brute force. Nemesis also marks Umbrella Europe's turn toward semi-autonomous BOWs that escalate bioterror from secret labs to actual urban warfare. The chaos unleashed in Raccoon City isn't just viral, it's a calculated bioweapon deployment designed to eliminate threats with surgical precision while sowing mass panic. Fans remember Nemesis for one thing, being that terrifying, unkillable hunter who just won't quit. His repeated ambushes build a suspenseful cat-and-mouse game that turns every street corner into a nightmare. So if you thought that was intense, hold on tight, because the next creature we're diving into is even bigger and meaner. Del Lago. Del Lago is Resident Evil 4's iconic nightmare amphibian, a massive, plaga-infected mutant that turns a peaceful lake in Valdolobos into a watery death trap. Unlike other monsters you face on foot, Del Lago's threat comes from the environment itself. You're trapped on a small boat armed with only a handful of harpoons, dragged helplessly across the water by this towering predator. Before you dismiss it as just a big frog, hear me out. Del Lago isn't simply a giant monster. It's a perfect example of parasite bioweaponry extending beyond humans into natural ecosystems. The plaga parasite that controls it integrates so deeply that this lake becomes its hunting ground, and Del Lago the apex aquatic predator, ruling the water with lethal efficiency. This is ecological terrorism, Resident Evil style. The encounter forces a unique gameplay style focused on environmental tension rather than direct firefights. You're dodging the monster's terrifying surfacing attacks, debris it hurls at your fragile boat, and frantic moments where it dives under to drag you down. Your limited harpoons aren't just damage tools, they're your lifeline. each throw a desperate gamble to stop Del Lago's relentless pull. Success means wearing it down enough to snap its grasp and eventually force it into retreat. Mechanically, Del Lago's weakness lies in those harpoon strikes and your ability to endure the brutal tug of war. Repeated hits slow its momentum, making it easier to dodge and counterattack. It doesn't have a conveniently exposed heart like other bows, but the sustained persistence damage combined with strategic timing is what breaks this amphibian's dominance. Here's where it gets really interesting. Del Lago shows how bioweapon tech has mutated the natural world itself, weaponizing ecosystems to act as battlefield zones. It's not just humans turn monsters. Nature can be corrupted into an extension of terror, making every splash in the water a potential death sentence. At least Del Lago is confined to a lake. Next, Leon heads back onto dry land to face a monster that trades water for pure, crushing muscle, El Gigante. El Gigante is proof that horror doesn't need fancy labs or massive corporations to be terrifying. It can grow right out of a sleepy rural village. This gigantic monster started as a normal human, but was transformed by the Plaga parasite, developed by the Los Illuminados cult in Resident Evil 4, into a towering colossus with raw strength enough to crush anything in its way. Before you roll your eyes at giant monsters being cliché, hear me out. El Gigante isn't just muscle and rage. It's a brutal fusion of human size and parasitic control. The Plaga parasite causes extreme hypertrophy, making the host monstrously large and disturbingly resilient. But here's the kicker. The parasite literally bursts out of the creature's back during the fight, revealing a vulnerable core Leon must target to bring it down. Leon battles El Gigante in vast outdoor arenas that highlight the savage struggle between hunter and beast. Without cramped corridors to hide in, Leon relies on ranged weapons, quick thinking, and the environment itself. The monster's slow but devastating stomps, grabs, and throws keep you alert. One mistake means death. What makes El Gigante stand out in the Resident Evil bioweapon lineup is how it adds parasitic domination to viral mutations. It's not just a lab experiment. It's a living weapon grown in a cult's twisted backyard, showing how infection no longer stays contained to labs or secret facilities. That contrast, rural nightmare versus sterile lab horror, makes El Gigante feel both familiar and alien, its brute force bound to a fragile parasite, daring you to exploit its weakness. If you thought monsters like Tyrant or Nemesis were Resident Evil's peak terror, El Gigante proves there's a different kind of monstrous out in the wilderness. But if this giant seems bad, wait until you hear about the aquatic nightmare swarming an entire cruise ship. Next up, Malacoda. Malacoda is one of Resident Evil's most unsettling aquatic monstrosities, a massive parasitic worm swarm infected by the T-Abyss virus, designed as a horrifying bioweapon for underwater terror. But before you picture a single huge creature, hear me out. Malacoda is actually a writhing mass of parasitic worms fused together inside a gigantic host organism. It's not just about size, it's about scale and ecological nightmare. The T-Abyss virus, created by Umbrella and later used by the terrorist group Il Veltro, specializes in underwater environments. Malacoda weaponizes naturally parasitic worms that usually infect fish, turning them into an aggressive swarm. This infection twists both parasites and host, creating a living horror lurking beneath the seas around the Queen Zenobia cruise ship. During Resident Evil Revelations, Malacoda attacks BSAA agents like Chris Redfield as they attempt to board or evacuate the Queen Zenobia. The swarm erupts from the water, forcing agents to fend off endless worm clusters while dodging attacks from the massive host hiding beneath the waves. The fight isn't a slugfest. It's a complex challenge requiring players to target multiple worm segments emerging from the host's body while avoiding slam and projectile attacks. A relentless, multi-target nightmare demanding precise timing and positioning. Beating Malacoda means destroying visible worm clusters with rocket launchers and heavy fire, then landing a missile strike deep into the host's mouth once it's vulnerable. This two-phase fight keeps tension high, battling both a parasite swarm and a gigantic corrupted organism simultaneously. It's a fresh twist on Resident Evil's boss formula. Malacoda's design marks a leap in bioweapon evolution, extending the T-Abyss virus's parasitic threat from land to water, turning ecosystems into weapons. The virus's power to mutate aquatic parasites en masse hints at ecological disaster far beyond isolated outbreaks. One infected waterway could spawn these horrors. Imagine open ocean scale. Compared to earlier monsters, Malacoda is less about brute humanoid strength and more about overwhelming parasitic infestation, pushing bioweapons into aquatic ecological warfare. Its defeat is both a tactical victory and a symbol of resistance against the rising tide of T-Abyss aquatic terror. But if you think parasitic worm armies are bad, wait until you see the Ultimate Abyss, T-Abyss's next viral evolution, Ultimate Abyss. Jack Norman's transformation into the Ultimate Abyss is Resident Evil, Revelation's answer to the ultimate bioweapon showdown, both punishing and mentally disorienting. Norman, leader of the terrorist group Il Veltro, overdoses on the T-Abyss virus, triggering a monstrous mutation that fuses fanaticism with viral power. You're not just fighting a monster, but a walking symbol of extremism, spiraling wildly out of control. Before you dismiss it as a standard giant boss fight, hear me out. The Ultimate Abyss battle is layered with complexity. Norman's transformation is unstable, filled with hallucinations that turn targeting into a brutal pattern recognition challenge. He teleports around the arena while spawning illusory clones. These duplicates look almost identical, but only one, the one with purple smoke from its mouth, is real. Attack the fakes, and you waste ammo, wait too long, and devastating attacks demand split-second dodges. On top of that trickery, Ultimate Abyss has multiple weak points to exploit carefully. His exposed heart appears during specific attacks, and is your primary damage focus. But here's the kicker. Sometimes his back literally opens like a grotesque aperture. This ultra-weak spot is even more vulnerable, but only when Norman curls up after charging. Missing these tells drags the fight out painfully. There's also a critical moment when Norman falls, letting you charge a powerful attack that deals massive damage without ammo. Nailing the timing is key. This multi-phase fight tests endurance and observation, far from the simple aim and shoot bosses of earlier Resident Evil games. Health items are scarce, and the arena offers green herbs you'll need to grab strategically. You balance aggression with caution while filtering real Norman from illusions amid a haze of teleporting horrors. Narratively, the Ultimate Abyss represents both Norman's downfall and Il Veltro's ideological madness. His form shows what happens when bioweapons meet fanaticism, an uncontrollable force no one can contain. It's a brutal reminder. Viral monstrosity combined with radical extremism results in unpredictable, deeply dangerous chaos. If you think it's just a numbers game, think again. This fight is a psychological puzzle and a narrative climax. Norman's Ultimate Abyss perfectly merges viral horror with ideological madness, a fitting finale before the series dives into the Megamycete fungal nightmare. Megamycete. The Megamycete isn't just another monster, it's a full-on fungal hive mind with the power to rewrite what we understand about life and death in Resident Evil. At the core of the mold genus, this colossal fungal mass stores genetic memories and consciousness, making it way more than just a creepy spore factory. It's basically a living database where identities get preserved, even resurrected. Before you think it's just sci-fi weirdness, this hive mind is dead serious. It's the backbone of the twisted experiments run by Mother Miranda's village in Resident Evil Village, creating bioweapons that don't just mutate flesh, but wrestle with souls. Mother Miranda's obsession with resurrection ties directly into the Megamycete's ability to save and replicate memories, even letting her puppeteer her 4 monstrous lords like their nodes on her fungal network. These lords aren't just brutal bosses. They embody the hive mind's flagship agents, blurring the boundary between who's alive, who's dead, and who's just borrowed time from the fungal root. It's the franchise's biggest existential horror punch. What happens when your very sense of self becomes hostage to a mind that refuses to die? Autonomy becomes a joke, replaced by collective control under a monstrous fungal intelligence. Forget mutations. This is mind control amplified to an unbearable, metaphysical degree. Ethan Winter's final showdown with the Megamycete drives this home. To stop the Black God fungus, he destroys its root network, cutting off the hive mind's ability to resurrect and control. It's a brutal sacrifice that literally cuts off the head of this unseen beast, ending Miranda's twisted dream and Ethan's forced half-life. The fight isn't just a boss battle, it's a symbolic rupture of identity and memory chains that the mold had woven through the village and beyond. Here's the thing. The Megamycete pushes Resident Evil's horror from the physical to the philosophical. It takes the franchise's bioweapons concept and evolves it into a cosmic horror-level threat, a collective intelligence capable of storing, resurrecting, and controlling multiple human identities at once. It's a hive mind that doesn't just spread infection, but erases the line between life and death, turning memories into prison cells. This escalation cements the Megamycete as the ultimate fate of Umbrella's legacy and the Connection's failed ambitions. Where bioorganic horror becomes metaphysical dread, it's a big leap from Tyrants and Nemesis. The nightmare here isn't just getting ripped apart, it's losing who you even are. Not all Resident Evil monsters are giant and scary. Some are fundamentally unsettling because they threaten the core of what makes us human. The Megamycete is exactly that. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Resident Evil has produced some of the most disturbing creatures in gaming history. From parasitic nightmares that hijack your brain, to fungal infections that turn loving families into cannibals, the franchise has spent decades finding new ways to ruin your sleep. So today, I'm breaking down every one of Resident Evil's most terrifying monsters and everything that makes them tick. Starting with the one that literally started it all, Tyrant. Before there was Nemesis, before Mr. X was stomping through the Raccoon City Police Department in a trench coat, there was the T-002. And here's the thing. This single creature is the reason every Tyrant in the entire franchise exists. The T-002 was the first successful product of Umbrella's Tyrant project, a top-secret initiative to create enhanced human bioweapons with superior intelligence. Not just strong, intelligent. The T-002 retained cognitive function almost at the same level as its pre-infected human form, meaning it could follow complex tactical commands far beyond what simpler bioweapons like Hunters were capable of. Umbrella had finally built a monster that could think, but here's where it gets complicated. In May 1998, interference from Queen Leech allowed the T-002 to release an airborne pathogen that infected multiple individuals at the Arklay laboratory. That single event spiraled completely out of control, eventually leading to the destruction of Raccoon City. Umbrella's greatest achievement became the catalyst for their greatest disaster, which is, not ideal. And the T-002 never even got to prove what it could do. Its life was cut short before full deployment, but its DNA template lived on. The T-103 mass-produced clones, including the infamous Mr. X, were all built from the T-002's blueprint. Every Tyrant that has ever chased you down a hallway owes its existence to this one prototype sitting in a tank beneath the Arklay Mountains. But if you think a thinking bioweapon is scary, wait until you hear about what happens when a zombie you already killed decides it's not done with you yet. Crimson Head. You know what's worse than a zombie? A zombie you already killed coming back faster, angrier, and harder to put down because you were too cheap to burn it. Crimson Heads are what happens when you leave a zombie corpse lying around in the Spencer mansion like dirty laundry. Standard zombies you've already downed undergo a secondary mutation if you don't dispose of the body. Their skin turns deep red, their speed skyrockets, and they're not shuffling anymore, they're sprinting. Here's where resource management becomes psychological warfare. You can prevent the transformation entirely. Destroy the head, take off a limb, or burn the corpse with fuel. Except fuel is precious. Every canister you pour on a dead zombie is one you can't use later, so you start making calculations. This hallway is out of the way. I probably won't come back here. Famous last words, because if you guess wrong, that zombie you left on the floor is now a Crimson Head, and it knows you're there the instant you walk in. Normal zombies only react when you get close. Crimson Heads lock onto you from across the entire area and close the distance fast. And then there's the Crimson Head prototype one, sealed in a coffin beneath the mansion cemetery. This thing has up to 5,600 HP depending on difficulty. For context, Chris Redfield has 1,400. A single reanimated zombie can absorb more punishment than the protagonists themselves, which is, not ideal. The genius of this system is that the game never punishes you for fighting. It punishes you for being sloppy afterward. Every zombie becomes a ticking time bomb you either defuse or forget about until it's too late. But if a zombie that comes back stronger sounds bad, wait until you meet what happens. When one keeps mutating and loses its skin entirely. Liquor. Most creatures in Resident Evil are dangerous because of what they can do. Lickers are dangerous because of what they can't. They have 0 eyes, no skin. Their brains are completely exposed, sitting on top of their skulls like an invitation for anything sharp. And somehow, that makes them worse. Here's the thing. Lickers started out as regular people. In the latter half of 1998, humans infected with an unnamed T-virus strain underwent one of the most radical physical transformations in the entire franchise. We're talking complete loss of skin, reformed bone and muscle structure, massive talons, and a barbed tongue that can extend 6 to 8 feet to pierce and decapitate prey. 6 to 8 feet. Oh, that's longer than most people are tall. But the real nightmare is the blindness. You'd think losing your eyes would make a creature less threatening. Turns out no. The complete loss of sight supercharged their hearing to an almost absurd degree. Any sound, any footstep, any reload triggers immediate immediate lethal aggression. They don't need to see you, they just need to hear you breathe, and this is where the design gets genuinely clever. Every other enemy in Resident Evil up to that point operated on visual detection. You see them, they see you. Bullets happen. Lickers threw that entire loop in the trash. Suddenly you're not watching corners for movement, you're thinking about how loud your character's boots are on tile. You're creeping through hallways wondering if opening a door is going to get your head removed by a tongue moving faster than you can aim. The game shifted from visual stealth to acoustic stealth, and most players didn't even realize it was happening until they were already dead, which is, not ideal. But if you think a blind, skinless predator with a 6-foot tongue is bad, wait until you meet the thing that can see you just fine, follows you everywhere, and absolutely cannot be killed. Mr. X. Most monsters in Resident Evil want to eat you. Mr. X wants to complete a mission objective, and you just happen to be standing in the way. The T-00, better known as Mr. X, was one of 6 T-103 Tyrants airlifted into Raccoon City during the 1998 outbreak. 6, not 1. Umbrella dropped half a dozen of these things into a burning city like it was a routine delivery. The T-00 specifically had 2 jobs: recover a G-Virus sample hidden inside Sherry Birkin's pendant, and kill every surviving officer and civilian inside the Raccoon City Police Department. Not contain, not subdue, man, kill. Here's what makes the T-103 line so terrifying. These weren't mindless creatures stumbling through hallways. They possessed near-human intelligence and could function as bodyguards, assassins, retrieval agents, and frontline soldiers against armed opposition. Mr. X wasn't a monster wandering aimlessly. He was an operative executing orders with the focus of a trained killer who just happens to be 8 feet tall and functionally immortal, and that's the part that breaks your brain. During the B scenario of Resident Evil 2, you cannot permanently kill him. Every bullet you pump into his body buys you maybe 30 seconds of silence before those footsteps start again. That sound, the steady thud of boots on tile echoing through the police station, became one of the most psychologically oppressive elements in survival horror history. You're not fighting it, you're surviving it. Even his trench coat had a purpose. It wasn't a fashion choice. The coat allowed T-103 models to blend into human populations until deployment, meaning Umbrella designed these things to walk among civilians undetected, which is, not ideal. Mr. X essentially invented the stalker horror archetype within Resident Evil, the idea that something is always coming, always tracking, always just around the corner. He was the prototype, but if you think an unkillable man in a trench coat is bad, wait until you meet the thing Umbrella built to be even worse: Nemesis. Most monsters in Resident Evil have a ceiling. You figure out the pattern, you exploit the weakness, you win. Nemesis doesn't work like that. Nemesis gets worse the more you fight it. Umbrella Europe's number 6 laboratory created the Nemesis T-type by implanting NE-alpha parasites into T-103 Tyrant hosts. The result was a creature with intelligence and raw power that made standard Tyrants look like science fair projects. But the parasite itself is where things get truly disturbing. The NE-alpha resembles an enlarged human brain, and it controls its host by threading a tentacle upward through the skull, destroying the forebrain entirely and hacking directly into the brain's architecture. While it's in there, it secretes chemicals that supercharge the T-virus already present in the host, granting regeneration so extreme that conventional damage becomes essentially meaningless. Here's where it gets complicated. When Jill Valentine managed to severely injure Nemesis during the Raccoon City incident, most creatures would slow down. Nemesis disengaged its power limiter. It literally allowed the parasite to operate at full capacity, accelerating mutation in real time. Heavy tentacles replaced its arms, which meant it couldn't use firearms anymore. But those tentacles became even deadlier weapons than any gun, capable of whipping through targets and piercing flesh like it was nothing, and it doesn't stop at killing. The parasite can implant offspring into other hosts using those same tentacles, infecting victims with a supercharged Dapi-virus strain. Nemesis doesn't just eliminate targets, it recruits them. Every person it touches is a potential new parasitic host. The fundamental horror of Nemesis isn't its strength or its speed, it's the feedback loop. You heard it, it adapts. You adapt. It evolves past your adaptation. At a certain point, the parasite and the Tyrant host become completely indistinguishable. One organism built entirely around the concept of never ever stopping, which is, not ideal when you're a single woman with a handgun in a city full of zombies. But if Nemesis represents what happens when science pushes parasitic symbiosis too far, the next entry shows what happens when science pushes a single human being past every conceivable limit for decades. Dalmas Lisa Trevor. Every creature on this list is terrifying because of what it can do to you. Lisa Trevor is terrifying because of what was done to her. Born around 1953, Lisa was just a kid when Umbrella got their hands on her, and what they discovered changed everything. Lisa Trevor became the first known progenitor adapter since the Neolithic era. That means her body could survive exposure to viral strains that would flat out kill any other human being on the planet. Every other test subject died. Lisa just kept mutating and kept surviving. So naturally, Umbrella did what any morally bankrupt megacorporation would do. They made her a permanent test subject. For decades, Lisa was exposed to virus after virus after virus at the Arklay laboratory. Not to cure her, not to help her, just to see what would happen. She was a living petri dish, a child turned into a biological notebook for scientists who stopped seeing her as human, somewhere around experiment number 3. By the time they were done with her, she was barely recognizable as a person. Decades of continuous mutation had stripped away almost everything. Almost. Because here's the part that genuinely hurts. Despite everything they did to her, despite decades of experimentation that turned her into something the game classifies as a monster, Lisa Trevor retained enough consciousness, enough emotional capacity, enough humanity to recognize her own mother's corpse, and her last word before throwing herself down a chasm was, that's it! That was her one act of genuine agency across her entire existence as a laboratory specimen. Not an attack, not an escape, a choice to stop suffering. Umbrella's greatest bioweapon success was achieved by destroying a child's entire life, and the most human moment any creature in this franchise has ever had belongs to the one they tried hardest to make inhuman. But if Lisa's story made you feel something, the next entry is going to make you feel nothing but panic, because chainsaws don't really leave room for sympathy. Dr. Salvador. Nobody knows who this guy actually is, and that's what makes him terrifying. Dr. Salvador is a Las Plagas infected human standing roughly 6 feet 5 inches tall, wielding a chainsaw that can decapitate Leon Kennedy in a single swing. He has 3,000 HP on standard difficulty and 4,000 on professional, making him one of the tankiest human enemies in Resident Evil 4. But here's the thing, for a character this iconic, we know almost nothing about him. The name itself is a clue wrapped in irony. Doctor in Spanish refers specifically to medical professionals and surgeons. Salvador translates to the Savior, or the Messiah, so his full title essentially means the Savior Doctor, a celebratory designation suggesting he was once a respected surgeon held in high regard by Ramon Salazar, a healer, someone the village trusted with their lives. Now he carries a chainsaw. Let that sink in for a second. A man whose hands once held a scalpel, whose entire identity revolved around saving people, now sprints at you with a 2-stroke engine and a spinning chain of teeth. The inversion is almost poetic if it weren't so horrifying. Whatever the Plagas did to this man, it didn't just change his body, it completely rewrote his purpose, and the lore gives us basically nothing else to work with. The bottle cap from the shooting gallery minigame provides a scrap of information, but beyond that, his pre-infection identity appears entirely consumed by his parasitic role. There's no journal entry, no tragic backstory hidden in a file cabinet. Evidence suggests Salazar granted him dominance within the village hierarchy, potentially rewarding his medical service with the power of infinite life through Plagas infection, a gift that turned a doctor into a butcher. The scariest part isn't the chainsaw, it's that we'll never know what he was like before. His humanity didn't just die, it was erased. But if you think a man with no eyes for anything but violence is unsettling, wait until you meet a creature that literally had its eyes sewn shut. Garrador. The Garrador might be the most pitiful thing in the entire Resident Evil franchise, and that's saying something for a series where a little girl was experimented on for 30 years straight. The name translates to the claw in Spanish, which is about as on the nose as it gets. These were once ordinary humans, enhanced through Plagas parasites to become something far worse. The parasites granted them exceptional musculature, increased bone density, and razor-sharp claws on both arms, capable of tearing through flesh and steel alike. On paper, the perfect weapon. Here's the thing though, they worked too well. The enhancement made them so uncontrollably aggressive that they attacked anything in sight. Allies, handlers, furniture, walls, didn't matter. If it existed near a Garrador, it was getting shredded. So their creators, in their infinite wisdom, decided the best solution wasn't to scale back the experiment or, stop making murder machines. No, they sewed the creature's eyelids shut, literally stitched their eyes closed and threw them in cells, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets worse. Just like the lickers, removing their sight didn't make them less dangerous. It made them different dangerous. Their hearing sharpened to lethal levels, allowing them to track targets entirely through sound. Drop a pin in a stone corridor, and a Garrador will pinpoint your location and charge with enough force to impale you against a wall. Every echoing footstep in those confined castle spaces becomes a death sentence. Think about what that existence actually looks like. Permanently blind. imprisoned in darkness between fights. No understanding of why, just rage and sound and claws and nothing else. They can't see their captors. They can't see their victims. They exist in perpetual torment, desperate to destroy anything that makes noise, chained up until someone decides to let them loose on an intruder. Their creators built something too dangerous to control, then mutilated it further to compensate for their own failure. And somehow, the Garrador is the one locked in a cage. But if you think a blinded, claw-handed prisoner is unsettling, wait until you meet something that literally cannot die no matter how many times you shoot it. Regenerador. There's a moment in Resident Evil 4 where the game stops being an action horror and becomes something else entirely. You walk into a lab, the lighting changes, the music drops out, and then you hear it. This wet, raspy breathing coming from somewhere down the hall. That's the Regenerador. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most fundamentally wrong things Capcom has ever put on screen. Here's how they're made. Los Illuminados took human subjects and implanted not one, but multiple Plagas parasites into a single body. The result is a creature that barely qualifies as human anymore. The proportions are off. The skin is stretched and gray. The limbs move in ways that make your brain reject what it's seeing. It walks toward you with this slow, shuffling gait, arms swaying like they're not fully attached, and the whole time, it's breathing. Just breathing. But the real nightmare is what happens when you shoot one. You unload a full magazine into its torso and the thing stumbles, maybe loses an arm. Then the arm grows back. You blow off a leg and it drags itself toward you, while the leg regenerates in real time. Every parasite inside the body independently works to repair damaged tissue, meaning conventional weapons are completely useless. You're not fighting a creature, you're fighting a biological process. The only way to actually kill a Regenerador is with a thermal scope attached to a rifle, which reveals the parasites glowing inside the body like hotspots on an X-ray. You have to target and destroy each one individually. Miss even a single parasite and the thing keeps coming. It's brilliant game design disguised as a panic attack. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. Think about what infinite regeneration actually means for the thing experiencing it. A Regenerador cannot die through damage. Every wound heals. Every destroyed organ rebuilds. It exists in a state of infinite suffering and infinite recovery. A body that will never stop hurting and never stop fixing itself. It didn't ask for this. Nobody in that lab volunteered. And now it just walks hallways, breathing, forever. Which is, not ideal. But at least the Regenerador is slow. Its spiked variant lurking deeper in those island labs. That one's fast. Verdugo. Most creatures in Resident Evil are scary because they're powerful. The Verdugo is scary because it's patient. Created by Los Illuminados through a fusion of human and insect DNA under complete Plagas control, the two Verdugos served as Ramon Salazar's personal bodyguards. One wore red, the other black. They stood silently at his side, draped in resplendent Los Illuminados cloaks, looking like nothing more than loyal attendants. Here's the thing though, the red one used to be Salazar's butler. The black one used to be his housemaid. Let that sink in for a second. This man weaponized his own household staff. Beneath those cloaks, both Verdugos had been transformed into insectoid nightmares with a carapace harder than steel. But they didn't act like insects. They retained full human-level intelligence and tactical planning ability, which is exactly what makes them so much worse than a brute force creature. A Verdugo doesn't charge you, it stalks you, it watches. It waits until you're wounded, cornered, and running low on options before it even reveals its true form. That's not instinct, that's strategy. And the worst part, none of it is their choice. Despite appearing to possess genuine agency, despite the calculated hunting behavior and the deliberate decision-making, every single action is dictated by the Plagas parasite inside them. They look like they're thinking. They look like they're choosing, but they're puppets wearing the skin of the people they used to be, carrying out orders for the man who turned them into monsters in the first place. There's something uniquely horrible about a creature that's smart enough to plan an ambush, but has zero say in whether it wants to. The butler who once served Salazar dinner now serves as his executioner, and he doesn't even get the dignity of knowing that's what he's become. Huff. But if identity horror makes you uncomfortable, wait until you meet something that doesn't bother with identity at all. Just a giant axe and absolutely zero interest in conversation. Executioner Magini. Most creatures in Resident Evil come out of a lab. Some scientist mixed the wrong chemicals. Something escaped containment, and now there's a monster loose. The Executioner Magini didn't come from any lab. It came from a cult. This thing was a human being, a person who joined the instigator Majini's nationalist rebellion in Kijuju. That rebellion saw the deaths of hundreds of perceived foreigners and so-called race traitors. And somewhere in the middle of all that ideological violence, this individual got pumped full of Type 2 plaga and became something far worse than a foot soldier. It became a walking execution platform. The weapon alone tells you everything. A massive flaming axe swung with enough force to flatten anything in its path. The creature demonstrates multiple attack patterns, including devastating double swings it throws out as retaliation after you land a combo, which is, not ideal. Hey, nice hits. Here's 2 axe swings to the face as a thank you. But the grab attack is where things get genuinely cruel. If this thing gets its hands on you, it lifts you into the air and triggers a quick time event. Fail to shake free, and it throws you to the ground for a second QTE. Fail that one? Instant death. No second chances. Just dead. Here's where it gets complicated though. The executioner doesn't go down easy. Even when you've poured round after round into this thing, it keeps coming. No stagger animation that gives you breathing room. It just absorbs punishment and closes the distance. Every second you spend reloading is a second it spends getting closer with that axe. That detail is what makes the Executioner Majini arguably the franchise's most politically charged creature. This isn't a bioweapon built to spec. This is radicalization made flesh. A human being elevated to monstrous power through cult manipulation and parasitic enhancement, retaining possibly more of its original personality than any lab creation ever could. And that personality chose violence long before the Plaga finished the job. But if the Executioner Majini shows what happens when ideology meets infection, wait until you see what happens when a loving mother meets a fungal bioweapon. Marguerite Baker. Most Resident Evil monsters are scary because of what they look like. Marguerite Baker is scary because of what she used to be. Before the infection, Marguerite was exactly what you'd expect from a rural Louisiana mother. She cooked meals, kept the house running, welcomed guests. She was, by every account, a normal woman living a normal life. And then a psychoactive fungal bioweapon rewired her brain, and everything about her stayed almost the same. That's the part that gets under your skin. See, the fungus didn't erase Marguerite, it hijacked her. The infection colonized her neural tissue, inducing extreme violent tendencies and granting her superhuman durability, the ability to regenerate from wounds that should have killed her 10 times over. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. It kept enough of her original personality intact to create this horrible hybrid. She still acts like a mother. She still fusses over meals. She still talks to you like you're a guest in her home. She just expresses all of that through torture and biological experimentation on people she's kidnapped and dragged into her basement. Her maternal instincts didn't disappear, they mutated. Marguerite worked alongside her husband Jack and her son Lucas, all of them under the psychic control of Eveline, a bioweapon in the form of a little girl who the family was compelled to treat as their own. An entire family operation running out of a house that looks like it belongs on a real estate listing, not a crime scene. Their actual daughter Zoe was the only one who managed to resist. That's what makes Marguerite so effective as a horror concept. This isn't a lab. This isn't a castle. This is a kitchen, a living room, a family dinner table where something is deeply, fundamentally wrong with the food and the woman serving it. She represents the corruption of everything a home is supposed to be. Safety, warmth, a mother's care, all twisted into instruments of suffering. You're not fighting a monster in a facility. You're fighting a monster in a house that smells like it used to have fresh cornbread cooling on the counter. But if Marguerite is the infection of motherhood, her husband Jack is the infection of fatherhood. And somehow, his version is even worse. Jack Baker. Most of the creatures on this list were built to be monsters. Engineered in labs, grown in tubes, designed to kill. Jack Baker was a dad from Louisiana who made the mistake of being a good person. Before the infection, Jack was a normal, compassionate family man living in Dolby Parish. Then he found a young girl named Eveline, shipwrecked and alone, alongside a woman named Mia. He did what any decent person would do, brought them into his home, fed them, tried to help. That act of kindness destroyed everything. Eveline wasn't a lost child. She was a psychoactive fungal bioweapon developed by the Connections. The moment Jack brought her inside, the infection spread through his entire family. The fungus colonized their neural tissue, hijacking their brains while leaving just enough of their original personalities intact to make the whole thing infinitely worse. From 2014 to 2017, Jack kidnapped, murdered, and ate over 100 people. The infection granted him regenerative capabilities that bordered on absurd. Severed limbs grew back, wounds closed in seconds. You could put enough bullets into this man to fill a bathtub and he'd just keep coming. Which is, not ideal, but here's where it gets devastating. Jack experiences moments of clarity, brief windows where his actual consciousness overwhelms the infection, and he realizes exactly what he's become. During these moments, he doesn't attack, he doesn't rage, he apologizes, he recognizes the horror of what his body has done, and he begs the protagonist to free his family. Think about that. Over 100 murders, committed by a man who is occasionally awake inside his own body, watching it happen, unable to stop it. A man whose only crime was rescuing someone who needed help. Jack Baker is the emotional mirror of Lisa Trevor. Both were good people, annihilated by forces they never asked for. But Jack might be worse, because Lisa's consciousness eroded over decades. Jack gets to wake up, he gets to remember, and then the fungus pulls him back under. But if Jack Baker represents tragedy, you can at least comprehend. The next entry is something your brain genuinely cannot process. Baby. Every single monster on this list can be fought. You can shoot them, stab them, hit them with a rocket launcher if you're feeling dramatic. The baby is the exception. You get 0 weapons, 0 items, 0 ways to fight back. You're stuck in a pitch-black basement with a thing that wants to eat you, and your only option is to run and hide like a child during a thunderstorm. Here's the setup. Ethan Winters enters House Beneviento, and Lady Beneviento's infected plants start pumping hallucinogenic compounds into the air. From that point forward, nothing Ethan sees can be trusted, which means the baby, this massive, deformed, fetal creature hunting you through the basement, might not even be real. The game never confirms either way. And honestly, that's worse, because if it's real, at least you understand the rules. If it's not real, then your own mind is trying to kill you, and there's nothing scarier than that. The creature itself is a warped version of Ethan's daughter, Rosemary. It can't walk. Its arms and legs are underdeveloped, so it drags itself forward in this horrible grasshopper-like shape, pulling its body along the ground and leaving bloody streaks behind it. Its eyes barely function, and it only appears in total darkness. But its head can open wide enough to swallow a full-grown adult whole. If it catches you, that's it. Instant death. No quick-time event. Just gone. But the detail that broke people was the voice. This thing can talk. Not full sentences. Just 3 words. Mama, Dada, Yummy. A giant fetal monster dragging itself through a blood-streaked basement saying, Dada, while trying to swallow you whole. I don't know what to tell you. The baby appears at exactly 3 scripted points during the basement escape, and between each one, the thing just vanishes. No body, no evidence, no confirmation it was ever there at all. The game is deliberately messing with your head, and it knows exactly what it's doing. A confirmed monster can be understood. A hallucination that can kill you cannot. You're not just scared of the baby, you're scared of whether your own perception can be trusted. That's not survival horror, that's psychological warfare. But if you think a nightmare baby is the peak of Village's horror, wait until you meet the 9'6" aristocrat who's been drinking blood since the 1950s. Lady Dimitrescu. The internet turned this woman into a meme, a thirst trap, a 6'something goth girlfriend fantasy that broke Twitter for a solid week in 2021. And look, fair enough, but the actual lore behind Lady Dimitrescu is so much darker than her cultural reputation suggests that it's almost funny how hard everyone missed the point. Countess Alcina Dimitrescu maintained pseudo-feudal rule over the peasantry near Castle Dimitrescu from the 1950s until her death in February 2021. That's over 60 years of unchallenged aristocratic authority. The locals feared her for decades over allegations of mass murder and cannibalism. And here's the thing, every single allegation turned out to be completely true. Standing just under 9 feet 6 inches tall, her impossible height wasn't some random mutation. She inherited a blood disease from an ancestor, one with symptoms eerily similar to the progenitor virus. On top of that, she survived infection with the Kadu parasite, which should have killed her, but instead granted regenerative capabilities. The combination of both conditions created something that shouldn't exist, a nearly 10-foot tall cannibal countess with a healing factor, running an entire feudal society for 6 decades, which is, not ideal. She served as one of the 4 lords under Mother Miranda, maintaining genuine political authority the entire time. Her 3 daughters, Bella, Cassandra, and Daniela, weren't biological offspring. They were women she adopted and transformed through parasitic infection into loyal extensions of her household. And her established cannibalism wasn't some hidden secret. It was accepted practice within her domain. The people living under her rule knew what she was and simply lived with it, suggesting a complete moral inversion of every social structure she controlled. That's what makes her genuinely terrifying. Not the height, not the claws. The fact that she built and maintained a functioning society where human consumption was just how things worked for 60 years. Nobody overthrew her. Nobody fled. They just accepted that this was the deal. The internet gave her a fan club. The lore gave her a body count spanning generations. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Umbrella's biggest problem was never making something powerful. The T-Virus could do that in its sleep. Their real problem was making something they could actually control. Today I'm ranking and explaining every Tyrant in the Resident Evil franchise, from the weakest to the strongest. And we're starting with the embarrassing first draft that nearly killed the entire program. Proto-Tyrant, T001. Here's the thing about the T001. It's the weakest Tyrant on this list by a mile, but it might also be the most important one. Every design lesson Umbrella ever learned started with this thing failing spectacularly. Built at Arclay Laboratory, the T001 was the first functional attempt at creating an intelligent human bioweapon. Take a compatible human host, infect them with the T-Virus, and preserve enough brain function to follow complex orders. A super soldier you could actually point at a target. That was the dream. The reality was a nightmare. Surgical complications left the T001 spinal cord partially exposed and its nervous system severely impaired. Erratic muscle spasms, completely unpredictable behavior, and an exposed heart sitting right there on its chest like a bullseye for anyone with a pistol, which is, not ideal for a military weapon. You couldn't reliably point this thing at a target and expect results. It might charge the enemy, it might charge a wall. Umbrella had built a creature with genuine killing power and zero ability to direct it, like handing a flamethrower to a toddler and hoping for the best. And this is the core tension that defines every Tyrant on this list. The T-Virus naturally prioritizes raw biological power over structural stability. It wants to make something strong. It does not care if that something can follow a simple instruction like, kill that guy, not the other guy. Every model after this was an attempt to solve that exact problem. Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen defeated the T-001 twice during the 1998 incident, but the creature kept regenerating. It was Albert Wesker who finally put it down for good, with the remains destroyed when the Umbrella training facility self-destructed shortly after the franchise's first Tyrant and its most catastrophic failure. But every failure teaches you something, and Umbrella learned a lot from this one. They just had to build something that actually worked, and that's exactly what they did next. Tyrant T002, the T001 was a disaster. Everyone knew it. But the T002, this is where Umbrella looked at the data and said, okay, we might actually have something here. The T002 was the first Tyrant that worked. Not perfectly, not without problems, but it functioned. It could think, it could fight, it could follow orders. Intelligence was measured at almost the same level as its pre-infected human form, which is a massive leap from the T001, flailing around like a broken wind turbine with a spinal cord hanging out, and the physical specs backed it up. Superhuman strength and speed far beyond anything a normal human could match. Its left hand had mutated into a massive claw capable of impaling a human being like a kebab skewer. A single strike could knock out trained STIRS operatives, which is, not ideal for the operatives. But here's where it gets complicated. That intelligence everyone was so excited about, it was actually a liability. A dumber Tyrant follows orders because it doesn't know how to do anything else. The T002 was smart enough to have its own ideas. It could pursue independent interests beyond its program directives. Umbrella essentially built a weapon that could decide it didn't feel like being a weapon anymore. Then there's the exposed heart, sitting right there on the chest cavity, beating away for everyone to see. One critical vulnerability that any combatant with decent aim could exploit. This single design flaw haunted the entire Tyrant project going forward, and you'll see Umbrella trying to fix it in basically every model from here on out. The T002 was also stupidly rare to produce. Only an extremely small percentage of the human population possessed the right genetic markers for intelligence-preserving T-virus mutation. You needed a biological lottery winner just to have a shot at making one. Great business model. Still, the T002 proved the concept. Every model after this exists because this one worked just well enough to justify the budget. But if you think a smart Tyrant with a heart problem was hard to manage, wait until you see what Umbrella cooked up next. Tyrant C Umbrella looked at the T103 and said, what if we made it smarter and deadlier? And then they tried. And then it barely mattered. The Tyrant C is an advanced Tyrant model encountered in Resident Evil. Dead aim, deployed aboard the Spencer Rain cruise liner during a bioterror incident orchestrated by Morpheus D. Duvall, and on paper, it's a nasty piece of work. Gray-skinned, massive, and built like something that crawled out of a meat locker with a grudge. Where the standard T-103 is a lumbering wall of muscle that swipes and charges, the Tyrant C is noticeably more agile. It moves with a fluidity that feels wrong for something that size, closing distance fast, and hitting with devastating physical attacks. Its strikes can down you shockingly quick. You blink at the wrong time, you're done. So more aggressive than the T-103, more mobile than the T-103, more unsettling than the T-103. This thing should have been the definitive upgrade. Here's the thing. Umbrella built a sports car and forgot to put a gas tank in it. The Tyrant C's biggest problem is that it never got a chance to matter. It was deployed in a single contained incident on a cruise ship, fought by one operative, and that was it. No mass production, no field deployment across multiple operations, no legacy. It's like hiring a bodyguard who can bench press a truck but only ever works one shift. Hey, could you protect this ship? Absolutely. Once. Then I'm going to retire permanently. And that limited scope is what defines this entire model. Enhanced over the base T-103 in combat capability. Completely irrelevant in the broader Umbrella story. You can be the deadliest thing on a boat, but if nobody ever deploys you again, you're not a weapon. You're a footnote. The Tyrant C's appearance in Dead Aim is essentially its entire lore presence. And that tells you everything about how the franchise treated it. Impressive in a vacuum, forgotten the moment the credits rolled. But if the Tyrant C's problem was never getting a real chance to prove itself, the next model on our list had a far more embarrassing dependency issue. Tyrant T091. Umbrella Europe looked at the T-virus and the G-virus, two of the most devastating mutagens ever created, and thought, what if we just smashed them together? The result was the T+G viral strain, a T-virus variant that mutated upon contact with the G-virus, all crammed into a single Tyrant specimen. On paper, this should have produced the most dangerous bioweapon in Umbrella's entire catalog. In practice, they created a Tyrant that couldn't even do the one thing they designed it for. Here's the thing. The T091 was supposed to generate powerful bioelectrical abilities, essentially turning a Tyrant into a walking power plant that could weaponize electricity. That was the whole selling point of the T+G fusion, but the specimen completely failed to produce those intended bioelectrical properties. You take the two most dangerous viral agents on the planet, combine them, and the result just sits there doing nothing special. It was the Tyrant equivalent of buying two sports cars and welding them together, only to find out it doesn't start. Umbrella, to their credit, looked at this and said, yeah, this is a failure. And they were right. The entire point of engineering a T+G Tyrant was to create something beyond what either virus could achieve alone. A bioweapon that can't deliver on its core design function is not a weapon. It's a very expensive, very angry disappointment. Here's where it gets slightly interesting though. Despite being classified as a complete operational failure, the T091 was later stolen by Morpheus D. Duvall, which means somebody looked at this glorified biological paperweight and thought, I can work with this! Whether Morpheus saw potential in the T+G strain itself, or just wanted the specimen for further research, the theft suggests the fusion concept wasn't entirely worthless, just catastrophically underwhelming in its first iteration. Ultimately, Umbrella abandoned the T+G approach altogether, pivoting back toward parasitic enhancement and conventional T-virus modification. The T091 stands as proof that combining your two best ingredients doesn't automatically make a better product. Sometimes you just get something that doesn't do anything at all. But if the T091 was an embarrassing failure of ambition, the next Tyrant on our list took the opposite approach and succeeded by being as obedient and unassuming as possible. Ivan. Every Tyrant on this list was designed to do one thing: kill you in the most obvious way possible. Giant claws, exposed hearts, 8 feet of gray muscle stomping through a hallway. You see them coming, that's the point. But the Ivan wasn't designed to kill you. It was designed to stand next to you, and you'd never know what it was. The Ivan is a specially re-engineered T-103 derivation, built from the ground up as a personal bodyguard for Colonel Sergei Vladimir, the director of Umbrella's security and paramilitary forces. At least 2 specimens were created, always deployed as a pair, and here's what makes them genuinely unsettling. They looked human. Not kind of human if you squint, actually human. They could wear normal clothing, walk through a crowd, follow complex social instructions, and blend into human society without arousing suspicion. A tyrant that could pass for a person standing in line at a coffee shop, which is, not ideal, but that infiltration specialization came at a cost. To make the Ivans capable of behaving like people, Umbrella had to strip away basically everything that made other tyrants terrifying in a direct fight. Raw strength was reduced, mutation capacity was dialed back significantly, the entire genetic pathway was rerouted away from combat escalation and toward behavioral stability, human-compatible physiology, and the ability to process nuanced instructions beyond smash that guy. Where a standard T-103 was a battering ram with legs, the Ivan was a scalpel disguised as a handshake, and here's the dark punctuation mark on the whole thing. Both Ivans were ultimately killed by Albert Wesker, not by a squad of soldiers, not by a rocket launcher, by one man who decided that even the most obedient, most loyal tyrants in existence were still a problem he'd rather delete than trust. Two specimens engineered specifically for loyalty, killed by someone who understood exactly how dangerous that loyalty could become if it ever pointed in the wrong direction. But if the Ivan was Umbrella's attempt at subtlety, the next entry is what happened when they stopped being subtle entirely and just started printing tyrants like newspapers. Tyrant T-103, this is the one. The tyrant that completed the entire project. Every failure, every exposed spine, every mutated disaster before it was building to this moment. The T-103 is Umbrella's real victory, and it's not because this thing is the strongest tyrant ever made. It's because it's the first one they could actually control. Produced in 1998 from modified clones of the T-002, the T-103 achieved something no previous model could: mass production. Umbrella finally had a reproducible cloning protocol that let them manufacture dozens of these things and ship them wherever they needed a problem solved. And the T-103 could solve a lot of problems: bodyguard duty, assassination, target retrieval, frontline combat. This was the most versatile tyrant ever produced, capable of following complex orders that would have made earlier BOWs stare blankly at a wall and drool. But here's the thing that makes the T-103 genuinely fascinating. That red coat, the iconic trench coat that turned Mr. X into one of the most recognizable horror villains in gaming, it's not a fashion choice, it's a power limiter, and I don't mean that metaphorically. The mutation inside a T-103 doesn't naturally stop at the point where it's useful. Left unchecked, the T-virus keeps pushing, keeps mutating, keeps destabilizing the host past the combat functional threshold into something way too unpredictable to deploy. The coat physically suppressed that mutation progression, keeping the tyrant locked in a stable state where it could operate across multiple engagements without going nuclear. Remove the coat and you get a super tyrant, skin hardened to concrete-like density, claws out, all restraint gone, which is, not ideal when your mission was retrieve this one specific item quietly. That's the real genius of the T-103. Umbrella stopped asking how do we make it stronger and started asking how do we make it listen. Every tyrant before this was a science experiment with claws. The T-103 was a product, reproducible, deployable, and controllable enough that you could hand one a mission briefing and reasonably expect it to come back with results instead of a pile of bodies and a structural collapse. The community recognizes this thing instantly as Mr. X, and for good reason. It's the tyrant that proved the concept worked. Not the flashiest, not the most powerful, but the one that turned a decade of catastrophic failures into a functioning weapons program. And that program was about to start producing variants, starting with one that Umbrella sent to Rockford Island without a coat, just to see what would happen. Tyrant T-078. Here's a fun question. What happens when you take a T-103, strip off the limiter coat, and just let it loose? Umbrella wanted to know too, so they cloned a T-103, deliberately left off the power suppressor, and stored it on Rockford Island. Not as a frontline weapon, not as a field test against enemies, as a security measure for one of their military installations. Then the viral outbreak hit, and the T-078 was released to do what tyrants do best: hunt down survivors. Specifically, it was sent after Claire Redfield and anyone else unlucky enough to still be breathing on that island, which tells you everything you need to know about Umbrella's contingency planning. Hey, the base is overrun with zombies, and everything's on fire. Release the 8-foot murder clone. That should tidy things up. But the T-078 wasn't just a standard T-103 with its coat ripped off. it developed its own unique combat adaptations. Most notably, its claws were blunted, not sharpened into piercing weapons like earlier models, but flattened into what essentially functioned as biological battering rams. Every hit delivered devastating blunt force trauma rather than slashing damage. Think less scalpel, more sledgehammer wrapped in skin. This thing wasn't designed to stab you. It was designed to cave your ribcage in like a cardboard box. And it worked. The T-078 proved that T-103 genetics were fundamentally stable enough to operate in sustained combat even without artificial suppressants, keeping the mutation in check, which was a huge deal for Umbrella's research data. You could take the leash off and the thing wouldn't immediately melt into a pile of unstable flesh. It would fight, effectively. But here's where it gets complicated. During its encounter with Claire Redfield, the T-078's right hand started mutating mid-combat. Claws sprouted from the blunted fist. Muscle mass surged. The whole arm restructured itself into something far more lethal than its original configuration. And it didn't stop there. The T-078 eventually achieved full Super Tyrant transformation without anyone removing a limiter, because there was no limiter to remove. The mutation just happened on its own, triggered by sustained combat damage. So Umbrella got their answer. Can a T-103 function without a power limiter? Yes. Will it stay stable forever? Absolutely not. The uncontrolled mutation remained an inherent risk baked into the platform's genetics, and the T-078 proved it in the worst way possible. A security asset that turned into exactly the kind of catastrophe it was supposed to prevent. But if the T-078 showed what happens when you remove the leash, the next Tyrant shows what happens when you replace it with a computer chip. Tyrant, T-400TP. If you put a computer chip in a monster's brain, who's really in control? That's the question Umbrella asked themselves. And the answer they got back was not the one they wanted. The T-400TP was an experimental subspecies of the T-103, stored in Umbrella's R&D center in Raccoon City, and it represented a completely different approach to the control problem. Every Tyrant before this one relied on some kind of external or biological method to keep mutations in check. The T-103 had its power limiter coat. The Ivans had their advanced intelligence carefully directed toward obedience. But the T-400TP was the first Tyrant to use internal electronic control systems instead. Microchips, integrated directly into its neural structure. Umbrella basically looked at a bioweapon and said, what if we just put a computer in it? And honestly, on paper, the idea was brilliant. The T-0400TP underwent further genetic remodeling and refinement compared to the standard T-103 baseline, representing a more sophisticated iteration of the platform. But the real innovation was in the programming. Those neural microchips could be reprogrammed for entirely different mission profiles on the fly. A coat-wearing T-103 does one thing. It walks forward and kills whatever's in front of it. The T-0400TP could theoretically be reconfigured for infiltration, assassination, retrieval, defense, whatever Umbrella needed that week. It combined the T-103's proven combat chassis with genuine programmable versatility, a weapon you could point in any direction and reprogram mid-mission, which is, a useful combination. But here's where it gets complicated. The T-0400TP demonstrated apparent self-awareness, and then it rebelled against its researchers. Think about that for a second. Umbrella spent years trying to solve the Tyrant control problem. They went from limiter coats to directed intelligence to literal brain chips, and the monster still figured out it had a leash. Worse than that, it decided to pull. The electronic control systems that were supposed to make this Tyrant the most obedient model ever created instead gave it just enough cognitive framework to realize it was being controlled, and just enough processing power to decide it didn't like that arrangement. This is the fundamental paradox Umbrella never solved. You need intelligence for a useful weapon, but intelligence breeds autonomy, and autonomy breeds rebellion. You can swap out the coat for a chip, swap biology for technology, and the result is the same. The smarter you make the monster, the harder it fights the leash. The T-0400TP proved that electronic control was not the answer, which meant Umbrella had to get creative. Really creative. And the next Tyrant on our list is what happens when a rogue scientist decides Umbrella's entire approach is wrong and builds his own monster from scratch. Thanatos. Here's a question worth asking. What happens when you take one brilliant scientist, remove him from Umbrella's corporate red tape, and let him build a Tyrant with zero oversight? you get Thanatos, and it might be the single most impressive tyrant ever created by one person working alone. Greg Miller was a rogue Umbrella scientist who decided the company's entire mass production approach was holding back what tyrants could actually be, so he went off the grid and built his own. He deliberately synthesized the T-002's combat specifications with T-103 research data, cherry-picking the best traits from both lineages and fusing them into something optimized purely for one thing: killing. Not guarding, not retrieving, not infiltrating, just killing as efficiently and violently as possible, and the results speak for themselves. Thanatos boasted speed and jumping abilities that made standard T-103 models look like they were moving through waist-deep mud. Its hands were uniquely enlarged, ending in devastating stabbing claws that could impale a target before they even registered the attack. In nearly every measurable physical category, this thing outperformed Umbrella's entire factory line. One guy in a lab, working alone, built a better tyrant than a billion-dollar corporation with unlimited resources, which is, not a great look for Umbrella's R&D department. But here's where it gets really interesting. Thanatos might be the only tyrant in the entire franchise that never betrayed its creator. Every other tyrant eventually malfunctions, goes rogue, or turns on whoever built it. That's practically a job requirement, not Thanatos. It remained completely dedicated to Greg Muller's mission throughout the Raccoon City incident, hunting down UBCS operatives and survivors exactly as instructed. No rebellion, no independent agenda, just pure, unwavering loyalty to the man who made it. Hey boss, who do you want dead? That was the whole relationship, and putting it down wasn't simple either. Standard military ordnance couldn't kill it. You literally needed a specialized ampule shooter loaded with daylight, a purpose-built anti-tyrant compound to finish the job. Without that specific weapon, Thanatos just kept going. And when it did take critical damage, it didn't die. It mutated into Thanatos R, its super tyrant form, because of course it did. The community loves this thing, and honestly, it's hard to argue with them. Thanatos is basically proof that Umbrella's corporate bureaucracy was the real bottleneck in tyrant development. One scientist with a vision and 0 committee meetings created something that embarrassed the entire production line. Sometimes the best work happens when you fire the project managers. But if Thanatos represents what one rogue genius could accomplish with existing research, wait until you see what happened when Umbrella tried engineering a tyrant from the cellular level up using artificial genetic selection. Hypnos, T-type. Every single tyrant on this list follows the same basic combat logic. You shoot it enough, it goes down. Maybe it gets back up. Maybe it mutates, but the fundamental equation stays the same. Sustained damage equals eventual victory. Hypnos throws that equation in the garbage. The Hypnos T-type was an experimental tyrant developed at Sheena Island's tyrant plant, and it was built differently from the ground up, literally from the cellular level. Umbrella engineers created something called the Hypnos gene, a modified genetic strand that, when implanted into an organism, actively killed weaker cells through natural selection. Only the strongest cells survived. Only the strongest cells reproduced. The organism that grew from this process wasn't infected with the T virus and then shaped into a weapon. It was cultivated, cell by cell, to be the most efficient biological killing machine possible, named after the Greek god of sleep, which is a weirdly peaceful name for something designed to become more dangerous every second you fight it. Here's the thing that makes Hypnos genuinely terrifying. Every other tyrant has a ceiling. You can theoretically outlast a T-103. You can pump enough rounds into Nemesis to slow it down. Hypnos was engineered so that every phase of combat ended with it in a stronger physical configuration than when that phase started. Fighting it doesn't weaken it, fighting it feeds it, and in its initial form, you wouldn't even think it was that threatening. It resembled a genderless, hairless humanoid with smooth white skin, almost mannequin-like. The only visible mutation was one slightly enlarged arm with small claws. Creepy, sure, but not exactly panic-inducing compared to what we've already covered. But then combat begins, and the Hypnos gene does exactly what it was designed to do. The mutations escalate fast. A mouthful of fangs, dramatically larger claws, upper body muscle mass ballooning with every engagement. Each time Ark Thompson thought he'd put this thing down, it came back looking less like a lab experiment and more like something that crawled out of a nightmare. And here's the kicker. After being apparently defeated by Ark Thompson, Hypnos was still alive, still mutating. It achieved even greater muscle mass, even larger claws, continuing to optimize itself without any external stimulus beyond the damage it had already absorbed. The thing was functionally impossible to wear down through attrition because attrition was its entire design philosophy. That's Umbrella's most elegant and most horrifying innovation right there. They didn't try to control mutation like they did with the T-103's coat. They didn't bolt on cybernetics or parasites. They weaponized natural selection itself and let biology do the work. Every bullet, every explosion, every moment of sustained combat just accelerated the process, which is, you know, not ideal. But if Hypnos represents Umbrella perfecting biological adaptation, the next entry represents them perfecting something far worse, a weapon that hunts you, learns from you, and absolutely will not stop until one of you is dead. Nemesis, T-Type. Here's the thing about Nemesis, the creature chasing Jill Valentine through Raccoon City, that's not actually a tyrant. Not really. It's a parasite wearing a tyrant like a suit. Let me explain. Umbrella Europe's No. 6 laboratory developed something called the NEA parasite, a separate organism designed to be implanted into a T-103 host. Every previous attempt at parasite implantation killed the host outright. The brain couldn't handle two competing systems, but with the T-103's genetics providing a durable enough body, the NEA parasite successfully hijacked the host's brain functions without shutting the whole thing down. The parasite became the brain, the tyrant became the body, two organisms, one nightmare. And that symbiotic relationship changed everything. Nemesis doesn't just follow orders like a T-103, it strategizes. It adapts to opponent techniques in real time. It learns from failed attacks, picks up weapons, and executes complex tactical maneuvers with genuine self-awareness. We're not talking about a mindless brute stumbling toward a target. We're talking about something that watches you fight, catalogs what works, and then makes sure it never works again. If you damage Nemesis during combat, it undergoes regenerative mutations, specifically designed to counter the techniques that cause the damage. It literally evolves countermeasures against whatever strategy is hurting it. You found something that works? Congratulations. It won't work twice, but the real differentiator isn't the intelligence. It's how Nemesis mutates. Every other tyrant on this list follows the same mutation playbook. Take damage, get bigger, sprout claws, develop thicker armor, more muscle, more bulk, more of the same thing but angrier. Nemesis breaks that pattern completely. Because the NEA parasite is running the show, the T-virus doesn't strengthen the tyrant body, it strengthens the parasite itself. So instead of growing bigger arms or denser skin, Nemesis grows more tentacles, more appendages, more of the alien organism that's actually in control. Which means every mutation pushes Nemesis further from humanoid and closer to something genuinely alien. By its final form, Nemesis is barely recognizable as something that once looked like a person. It devolves into a grotesque, writhing mass of parasitic tissue and tentacles, a blob of biological horror that has more in common with Lovecraft than Resident Evil. Every other tyrant's final form is essentially the same thing, but scarier. Nemesis's final form is a completely different organism. The tyrant is gone. Only the parasite remains, swollen and mutated beyond recognition, still hunting, still adapting, still refusing to stop. That's what makes Nemesis terrifying in a way no other tyrant manages. It's not just strong, it's smart enough to learn from you, adaptive enough to counter you, and alien enough that every time you think you've beaten it, the thing that crawls out of the wreckage is something worse, something less human, something with more tentacles and fewer reasons to stop. But even Nemesis, for all its intelligence and adaptive horror, was still fundamentally biological. Umbrella's final answer to the Tyrant question wasn't a better organism. It was a machine. Tyrant. T-A-L-O-S. Every single Tyrant on this list had the same problem, some version of the same problem. The biology was too unstable, or too stupid, or too rebellious, or too fragile in exactly the wrong spot. Umbrella spent over a decade trying to engineer the perfect soldier out of raw viral mutation, and every single time, the T-virus found a new way to say no. T-A-L-O-S was Umbrella finally admitting defeat. Designated T-011, The Tyrant armored lethal organic system wasn't a Tyrant in the way anything else on this list is a Tyrant. It was computer-controlled powered assault armor grafted directly onto a Tyrant's body, creating a biomechanical hybrid war machine that didn't just push the boundaries of bioweapon design, it abandoned them entirely. Here's the thing. Every previous Tyrant was engineered to survive a battlefield encounter. TALOS was engineered to dominate one. We're talking a homing missile launcher system mounted directly onto the creature, metallic alloy armor plating capable of withstanding missile fire, an artificially improved cardiovascular system granting mobility that should be physically impossible for something that size. This wasn't a monster with weapons. This was a weapons platform that happened to be partially alive, and the control problem that plagued literally every model before it solved. A chip implanted directly into the brain gave handlers remote computer control, full command authority, zero autonomy. The T-101 couldn't follow basic orders, the T-103 needed a coat to stop it from mutating, Nemesis had a parasite running the show, TALOS had none of these issues because TALOS didn't get to have opinions. You told it where to go, what to kill, and when to stop, and the armor simultaneously restrained runaway mutations, meaning the thing that destroyed almost every other Tyrant on this list was physically locked behind metal plating. Instability, solved by armor. Intelligence problems, solved by remote control. Mutation spiraling out of control, solved by bolting the entire organism inside a mechanized shell. Every failure on this list has a direct answer built into TALOS. But here's where the comparison gets interesting. TALOS stands alongside Nemesis T-Type as one of Umbrella's two ultimate bioweapons, the absolute ceiling of the Tyrant project, but they got there through completely opposite philosophies. Nemesis was biology pushed to its limit, a parasite hijacking a Tyrant's brain, granting intelligence, adaptability, the ability to use weapons and track targets across an entire city. Everything Nemesis could do came from organic systems. TALOS looked at all of that and said, or we could just use a computer and a missile launcher. It's the final admission that the T-virus alone was never enough. After a decade of trying to control biology, of breeding compatible hosts, of implanting parasites, of slapping coats on things and hoping for the best, Umbrella gave up on making the virus cooperate and just bolted machinery onto the problem instead. Nemesis was the dream. TALOS was the reality. The only known specimen was neutralized by Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine during their infiltration of a Russian Caucasus base. Two highly trained operatives with the right tactical approach brought down the most powerful thing Umbrella ever built, which is the perfect ending to the Tyrant Project's story. A decade of research, billions in funding, hundreds of failed specimens, thousands of dead test subjects, and the absolute pinnacle of everything Umbrella ever created still wasn't enough. You can armor it, program it, fuse it with a parasite, or strap a missile launcher to its back. At the end of the day, the T-virus was never going to give Umbrella what they wanted. TALOS is the most powerful Tyrant ever built, and it's still lost. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. The Tyrant isn't just a monster, it's a bioweapon so specific that only 1 in 10 million humans on Earth could survive becoming one. 30 years, dozens of variants, and every single one in the entire franchise traces back to the same cloned DNA. Today, we're breaking down the complete evolution of Resident Evil's Tyrants, from the very first prototype to the most advanced stalker Capcom has ever designed, starting with the experiment that almost ended the program before it began. Born Broken. The first Tyrant was never supposed to be the final boss of anything. It was supposed to be dead. Umbrella launched the Tyrant project in 1988 inside their Arclay laboratory. The goal was elegant. Build a mass-producible super soldier, obedient, physically unstoppable, and just intelligent enough to follow orders. A living weapon they could sell to the highest bidder. But the T-virus had a problem. It destroyed the very intelligence it was supposed to preserve. The proto-Tyrant, designated T-001, was their first attempt, and it was a disaster. The virus overdosed the host system, decomposing the skin, exposing the spine, and most critically, destroying the brain. It had the strength of a full Tyrant, but the intelligence of nothing. It couldn't follow orders, it couldn't distinguish friend from enemy. Official Umbrella notes stated it was too brutally simple to even deserve the name Tyrant. They slated it for disposal and moved on. But here's the thing. The failure data from the T-001 taught researchers Birkin and Wesker exactly what not to do. They modulated the viral strain, carefully calibrated the infection process, and produced the T002, 8 feet 7 inches tall, 540 pounds, capable of sprinting at nearly 70 kilometers per hour, one oversized claw, one near-human arm, and an exposed heart as both its greatest weapon and its only weakness, the most powerful BOW Umbrella had ever created, killable by shooting it in the chest. Wesker deliberately released the T002 during the Mansion incident to collect combat data against STARS. It immediately impaled him through the torso. The T-002 was the perfect soldier. It just didn't care who it killed. Players finished it with a rocket launcher on the helipad. That two-phase structure, scripted encounter, then mutated final form, then heavy weapon finish, became the template for every single Tyrant boss that followed. The T-002 set the blueprint for the next 30 years. But Umbrella had a bigger problem. They could build one Tyrant. They needed thousands. The trench coat. The T-103 looks like a man. That was the entire point. Umbrella's engineers took the embryonic data from the T-002 project and asked a completely different question. Instead of building the most powerful Tyrant possible, what if they built one that could walk through a city undetected? One that could infiltrate, gather intelligence, and then eliminate targets before anyone realized what they were looking at? The T-103 was the answer. Near human proportions, no exposed claws, no visible mutations. And that iconic trench coat isn't just clothing. That coat is the power limiter. Bulletproof, fireproof, explosion resistant, and most critically, it suppresses the T-virus from triggering uncontrolled mutation. Without it, the T-103 degrades into a super Tyrant within minutes. The entire covert infiltration concept relied on that coat staying on. The large size was a problem they never fully solved, but the concept was a massive step forward from a 7-foot monster with an exposed heart, but mass production was still the real breakthrough. The T-002 required a genetic compatibility so rare, only 1 in 10 million humans qualified. The T-103 solved this with the discovery of beta-hetero-non-serotonin, a brain chemical secreted during puberty. When introduced during cultivation, it allowed almost any human to become a Tyrant. Umbrella bought an entire island, Sheena Island, and built a dedicated Tyrant plant. They used young male prisoners as base subjects for extraction. They had to remain unanesthetized during the process to maximize yield. That detail is in the official records. The specific unit players encounter in Resident Evil 2, designated T-00, was one of 6 T-103s airlifted into Raccoon City on September 29, 1998. His mission was to recover the G-virus sample from Sherry Birkin's pendant and eliminate every survivor in the RPD building. The other 5 were deployed against Delta Force operatives nearby as a live combat test. In the original 1998 game, Mr. X only appeared in the second playthrough. Scripted wall breaks, predetermined locations, basic AI, terrifying for 1998, by modern standards, almost quaint. But the 2019 remake changed everything about what a Tyrant could do. Footsteps. The RE2 remake's Mr. X doesn't teleport, he doesn't respawn at scripted locations. He physically walks through the Raccoon City Police Department in real time, opening doors, checking rooms, methodically searching. No clip cameras confirmed it, players confirmed it. He is always somewhere in that building, and you never know exactly where. Gunfire is the primary attractor. If he can't find you quickly, his hearing sensitivity increases. The longer the chase, the sharper his senses. He opens doors, he crosses multiple rooms. He only stops pursuing at the entrance to safe rooms, and even then you can hear him outside, pacing. The only way to temporarily stop him is enough firepower to the head, and even then he's back within seconds. But the sound design is what made him genuinely terrifying. The heavy footsteps through walls, the dynamic soundtrack that shifts the moment he detects you. Players described loading zones and floor transitions as moments of pure dread because you could hear him but couldn't see where he'd come from next. Director Kazunori Kadoi confirmed the footsteps were custom-designed sound effects, not recorded from actual footsteps. Every stomp was deliberate. The fedora almost didn't happen. Art director Satoshi Takamatsu initially used a military look for early designs. When the direction shifted toward realism, the team wanted Mr. X to look natural in a city environment. Takamatsu was unsure about the hat, but felt the design was lacking without it. That decision turned an already terrifying enemy into a meme within 48 hours of launch. Modder Zombie replaced Mr. X's theme with DMX's X Gon Give It To Ya. The mod went viral immediately. Thomas the Tank Engine, Dog Chew Toy Footsteps, a complete removal mod for players who genuinely couldn't handle the stress, Kadoi admitted. We had no idea that people would enjoy Tyrant to this degree. The remake shipped over 4 million copies, and Mr. X was widely credited as a key reason. A gentleman monster in a trench coat and fedora, calmly destroying everything in his path, became one of the most recognizable enemies in gaming history. Nobody designed the next step, because the next step had been designed a decade earlier, sitting in a lab in France, waiting, and it could use a rocket launcher. Nemesis. Nemesis is not a better Tyrant. It's a different category of thing entirely. Umbrella Europe's number 6 laboratory in France spent nearly a decade developing the NE alpha parasite. The concept was surgical. Take a mass-produced T103 clone and implant the parasite directly near the medulla oblongata, where it hijacked brain functions and served as a supplementary external brain. Writer Yasuhisa Kawamura described it as a dual-core CPU. The host's brain handles basic motor function. The parasite handles intelligence, target acquisition, and tactical decision-making. 2 brains, 1 body, 0 chance of the mental degradation that crippled every prior Tyrant. The implantation was catastrophic to the physical form. Tentacles ripped through the face, chest, right arm, and abdomen. Surgical staples held the body together. It lost its nose, lips, and right eye. The unit designated Nemesis T02 was internally codenamed the Pursuer for a reason. It didn't wander, it hunted. Here's where it gets different. Mr. X walks and punches. Nemesis sprints, fires a custom rocket launcher, recognizes specific targets from photographs, and speaks. 1 word, STARS. It shot down a rescue helicopter to prevent Jill Valentine's escape. That is tactical reasoning. No Tyrant before it had demonstrated anything close. The original 1999 game gave players roughly 11 encounters, 8 of them optional, and this is the design decision that defined an entire genre. If you chose to fight Nemesis in those optional encounters, it dropped unique weapon upgrade parts. So every time you heard the pursuit music start, you faced a real choice. Spend your ammo and earn the upgrade, or run and conserve resources. A rocket launcher that costs you half your inventory. A grenade launcher upgrade that might save your life 2 rooms later. The risk-reward loop was perfectly calibrated, and it was built entirely around one enemy. It could also follow you across multiple rooms. Door transitions used to mean safety in Resident Evil. Not anymore. The remake in 2020 tried to surpass it. Visually, the new Nemesis was striking. Restrictive gear, warning labels, a chest-mounted regulation device. Producer Peter Fabiano said the team was determined to exceed what Mr. X achieved in the year prior. The stalking sections only covered roughly an hour of gameplay. 1 grenade downed him. The clock tower interior was cut entirely. Community verdict was swift and nearly unanimous. RE3 remakes, Nemesis was mechanically weaker than the Mr. X it was supposed to surpass. The original still holds. 26 years later, 1 word is still enough. But evolution doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it moves sideways, into weirder territory than anyone expected. The Forgotten Ones. While Nemesis was hunting Jill through Raccoon City, Umbrella's other labs were running their own experiments, and some of them were deeply strange. The most ambitious was TALOS. Full name, Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System. Where Nemesis solved the Tyrant's intelligence problem with a parasite, TALOS solved it with a computer. Chip connections wired directly into brain cells allowed remote control through Umbrella's Red Queen supercomputer. Add powered assault armor, reinforcement implants, and long-range homing weaponry, and you had something designed not to fight survivors in a police station, but to go up against military hardware, helicopters, armored vehicles, entire battalions. Sergei Vladimir personally extracted the prototype from the Arklay laboratory during the Mansion incident and transported it to his private facility in Russia for completion. This matters because Vladimir was the man every Tyrant was cloned from. He referred to TALOS as a pinnacle of biological weaponry. He called them his brothers. Chris and Jill destroyed it in 2003, and that fight officially marked the end of Umbrella Corporation as a functioning entity. But TALOS wasn't the only experiment running in parallel. Code Veronica in 2000 shipped a T103 unit to Rockford Island, deliberately without its power limiter code, just to see what would happen. Designated T078, it developed uniquely fused, blunted fists, and notably lacked the exposed heart weakness every Super Tyrant before it had shown. Claire Redfield eventually killed it by launching launching a cargo crate into it off the back of a moving plane. Both of them went into the ocean. Then there was Thanatos, created in 2003 by a rogue Umbrella scientist named Dr. Greg Mueller at Raccoon University. Mueller didn't use a Sergei clone as the genetic base. He sourced his own compatible donor and built a Tyrant from scratch, entirely outside the official program. He was furious when Umbrella wanted to mass produce it. He considered it art. Thanatos could survive a direct rocket launcher hit and was completely impervious to small arms fire. Killing it required a vaccine derived from its own blood, one of the only Tyrants in the franchise ever killed through biochemistry instead of brute force. These variants matter because they show what Umbrella's final years actually looked like. Not one unified program marching toward a clean next generation, but a dozen competing experiments pulling in different directions. Technology versus biology, art versus utility, covert infiltration versus open warfare. The cybernetic path TALOS represented. The artistic path Thanatos took. None of them survived long enough to find out which approach was right, because Umbrella collapsed before any of them could be answered, and in the vacuum it left behind, someone else had a very different idea about what a bioweapon should be. The end of Tyrants. Resident Evil 5 killed the Tyrant, not in a boss fight, in a design meeting. After Umbrella's bankruptcy following the Raccoon trials of 2003, Tricell stepped into the bioweapons market under the shadow influence of Albert Wesker. Las Plagas variants replaced the T-virus. A completely new pathogen called Ouroboros replaced Tyrant engineering entirely, and here's the detail that makes it sting. A traditional Tyrant was originally planned for RE5. Concept art exists. Enhanced veins, shoulder-mounted oxygen intake tubes, extendable clawed arms. Production director Yasuhiro Anpo confirmed it was cut because it clashed with the Ouroboros theme. The processing power of the PS3 enabled tentacle physics so complex and visually overwhelming that the old Tyrant design looked primitive next to it. Umbrella spent 15 years trying to solve the intelligence problem. Tricell skipped it entirely. Ouroboros was an RNA retrovirus with only two outcomes: adaptation or rejection. Compatible hosts gained superhuman abilities, ceased aging, near immortality. Incompatible hosts were consumed by writhing black tentacles absorbed into an expanding mass of organic matter. Wesker's endgame was loading it into missiles and dispersing it into the upper atmosphere, infecting every human being on Earth simultaneously. The genetically worthy survive. Everyone else becomes the tentacles. As a concept, it was the Tyrant program taken to its logical extreme. Instead of building individual super soldiers, forcibly evolve the species. But the ingredient that perfected Ouroboros came from someone who never signed up for any of this. After Jill Valentine survived RE3 and was cured of her T-virus infection, her body developed unique antibodies. Wesker discovered they could stabilize Ouroboros enough for viable host adaptation, so he captured her. She tackled him through a window to save Chris, and he took that as an opportunity. The P-30 device on her chest delivered a continuous mind-controlled drug requiring constant re-administration. She was a walking component in Wesker's planetary-scale experiment. The boss fights in RE5 reflected exactly what the game was: spectacle over horror. Ouroboros enemies were writhing tentacle masses with exposed orange cores, impressive to look at, mechanically repetitive to fight. And this was a giant Plagas-enhanced humanoid deployed as a live combat test against players in a truck section that critics universally described as fun and completely unscary. And Wesker himself, the man who built the entire Tyrant lineage, went out in a volcano, hit by two simultaneous rocket launchers, sinking into lava while screaming. It was the most memed ending in franchise history, and somehow also the most appropriate one. The community's verdict on RE5 was simple. Great co-op shooter, zero survival horror. The absence of a real Tyrant wasn't just a design choice, it was a symptom, and Resident Evil 6 was about to make every single one of those symptoms dramatically worse before someone finally decided to burn the whole thing down and start over. Ustanok. Resident Evil 6 had over 600 developers, 4 separate campaigns, and a bioweapon budget that produced some of the most technically ambitious enemies the franchise had ever designed. It also had almost zero survival horror. But buried inside all of that, there was one genuinely interesting idea about where the Tyrant concept could go next. Director Eiichiro Sasaki built each campaign around a different horror philosophy. Leon's got classic zombies. Chris has got military action. Jake Muller's campaign got the fear of being pursued. That single design decision produced the Ustanak, and the Ustinak is legitimately fascinating on paper. He was a former prisoner who volunteered for Neo Umbrella's BOW program. Born with an incredibly frail body, he had no objection to losing his humanity if it meant gaining power. He was the 323rd test subject for the C-Virus. The previous 322 all died within 24 hours. He survived, retained full human intelligence, and was immediately identified as the most resilient bioweapon ever produced. His lost right arm was replaced with a modular cybernetic prosthetic, accepting interchangeable attachments, including a claw, a drill, a Vulcan cannon, and a blood extraction syringe. He deployed small bat-like surveillance drones. He used tactics, but here's the detail that makes him genuinely different from every Tyrant before him. He only obeyed one person. Carla Radames, the scientist who created him, was the only voice he listened to. Not because of programming, because he had formed a deep emotional bond with her and viewed her as a mother figure. A bioweapon driven by loyalty. That is a completely new concept for this franchise. None of it translated into effective horror. The action game context stripped every encounter of tension. Jake and Sherry were too heavily armed, the set pieces too choreographed, the co-op too comfortable. The Ustinak survived building collapses, helicopter crashes, a mining drill, and submersion in lava before dying to a magnum shot to the exposed heart, which, for the record, is the same weakness as the T-002 from 1996. 30 years of evolution, same weak point. Then there was House, a massive C-Virus BOW, so critical to Neo Umbrella's plans that an entire underwater facility was built solely to support its development. Its purpose was to spread the C-Virus globally in gaseous form. It was only 70.3% complete when released, its translucent skin a defect of incomplete development. It served as the emotional climax of Chris's campaign, where BSAA agent Piers Nevans injected himself with the C-Virus to gain electrical mutation powers, held Heos off long enough for Chris to escape, and sacrificed himself to close the underwater bay doors. That moment worked. Almost nothing else in RE6 did. The community's verdict was the harshest in franchise history, and Capcom heard it, because the next game had no Umbrella, no T-Virus, no Tyrants, just a farmhouse in Louisiana, and something that had been in the ground long before Umbrella ever existed. Welcome to the family. Resident Evil 7 erased 30 years of bioweapons mythology and replaced it with a fungus. The mold, formerly called the Mutamesete, originated from an ancient super colony called the Megamesete, buried deep underground. It predated Umbrella entirely. When Mother Miranda discovered it in 1919 after losing her daughter to the Spanish flu, she found it granted intelligence, immortality, mimicry, and regeneration. Decades later, a crime syndicate called the Connections obtained mold samples and developed Eveline, designation E-001, the first E-series bioweapon. Where every Tyrant before her was built for direct combat, Eveline was designed to look like an innocent child and destroy targets from the inside through psychological manipulation and mind control. The exact opposite design philosophy from every Tyrant Umbrella ever made. But the Tyrant the game actually gave players wasn't Eveline, it was Jack Baker. Before Infection, Jack was a kind family man who pulled what he thought was a lost child from a capsized tanker. Eveline infected his entire family within hours. Between 2014 and 2017, under her control, the Bakers kidnapped, murdered, and cannibalized over 100 people. And then Jack emerged from the shadows of his own garage, looked Ethan Winters directly in the face, and said the most disarming thing a 7-foot regenerating monster has ever said in a horror game. Welcome to the family. Sun.Jack is the most effective Tyrant-like enemy in the franchise's modern era, and he has zero connection to the Tyrant program. He talks, he taunts, he smashes through walls with his bare hands, he can be downed temporarily and is back within seconds. His boss encounters escalate perfectly. A garage fight where the car becomes the weapon, a chainsaw duel that is a direct Evil Dead homage, and a final form covered in red eyeballs across a flooding boathouse. In the Daughter's DLC, a momentarily freed Jack pleads with Ethan to kill his family if it will end their suffering. He is a monster and a tragedy at the same time, and that combination is something the Tyrant program never once achieved in 30 years of trying. Here's the detail that closes the loop on the entire franchise. Jack Baker's AI became the foundation for Mr. X's AI in the RE2 remake. The stalker system built for RE7 was refined and elevated for 2019. The pursuer that defined the remake era grew directly out of the enemy enemy that replaced Tyrants entirely. Lady Dimitrescu in R.E. Village followed the same template through a completely different biological pathway. 9 feet 6 inches tall, implanted with a Skidoo parasite by Mother Miranda in the 1950s, stalking players through her castle with the same calm, methodical energy as Mr. X, she became a pop culture phenomenon within 24 hours of her first trailer. And then RE9 introduced its own pursuer, a chained figure called Big Mama, hunting protagonist Grace Ashcroft through a hotel with I described as closer to the xenomorph from Alien, isolation than anything Capcom has built before, hurt by light, sensitive to sound, smarter than anything the Tyrant program ever produced. 30 years ago, Umbrella built a monster that needed a rocket launcher to stop it. The franchise has spent every year since asking the same question with a different answer. What does unstoppable actually feel like? From the T-002's exposed heart, to Jack Baker's chainsaw, to whatever is waiting in that hotel, the answer keeps changing, and it keeps getting better. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Most horror games throw monsters at you that are big, loud, and stupid. Nemesis is none of those things. Well, okay, he's big and loud, but stupid? Not even close. In 1999, Capcom created something that fundamentally changed what a video game enemy could be, and every stalker-type enemy you've seen since owes this thing a debt. So let's break down every single form Nemesis has ever taken, starting with the one that traumatized an entire generation. Nemesis T-Type, classic first form. Here's what makes the original Nemesis so unsettling. It's not that he's a 7-foot monster. Resident Evil had plenty of those. It's that he's a 7-foot monster wearing business casual, black overcoat, gloves, boots, trousers. The creature looks like it's about to attend a very aggressive job interview. The designers at Capcom deliberately dressed Nemesis in clothing that would preserve a human silhouette, something just familiar enough to make your brain say that's a person before the rest of you screams that is absolutely not a person. Underneath all that fabric is where it gets genuinely horrifying. The Nemesis T-Type starts as a T103 Tyrant, which is already a nightmare on its own, but then Umbrella Europe grafted an NE alpha parasite directly onto the thing's brainstem. The parasite essentially replaces the entire nervous system, hijacking motor control, cognitive function, all of it. The result is a bioweapon with human-level intelligence and self-awareness, not instinct, not programming, actual tactical thinking. In a franchise built on shambling corpses that walk into walls, this thing can problem solve. The parasite's secretions chemically alter the host body's surface, producing that signature brown staining across any exposed flesh. Looks like someone left a bodybuilder in a swamp for 6 months. But those same secretions also grant regenerative properties that exceed standard Tyrant healing, which is not ideal for anyone trying to kill it. And then there's the rocket launcher, a specially modified FIM-92 Stinger, mounted on its left arm, operated with the kind of dexterity you really don't want a biological abomination to have. This thing can close distance on you in seconds and then fire a rocket at you, just in case the 7-foot mutant sprinting at you wasn't enough. But the detail that really sells the horror is the voice. Nemesis can speak, barely. One word, repeated over and over. S-T-A-R-S. The name of the elite police unit it was programmed to eliminate. It knows who you are, and it will not stop saying your unit's name while it chases you across every single block of Raccoon City without ever getting tired. That's not a monster. That's a coworker who won't leave you alone. Except this one has a rocket launcher and no concept of personal space. The whole design philosophy was built around avoiding the mindless beast archetype. Capcom wanted something that could use weapons intelligently, track prey with tactical purpose, and maintain pursuit indefinitely. Every version of Nemesis that came after this one is essentially trying to recapture what this first form nailed perfect, a corrupted human shape. Just smart enough to be terrifying, just vocal enough to be wrong. But as scary as the first form is, at least it's still wearing clothes. The second form, not so much. Nemesis T-Type, classic second form. So the first form of Nemesis is terrifying because it thinks. It stalks you. It fires rockets at you, it makes decisions. But eventually, you throw enough explosions, enough rocket fire, enough flamethrower fuel at this thing, and something breaks. Not the creature itself, the coat, the protective overcoat gets shredded through accumulated combat trauma, and that's when the NE alpha parasite inside makes a calculation that changes everything. See, the parasite's whole job up to this point has been keeping Nemesis functional as a humanoid weapon, repairing damage, maintaining structure, preserving that terrifying intelligence. But when the damage overwhelms even its enhanced regeneration, the parasite essentially panics. It triggers an emergency evolutionary adaptation, and the result is one of the most unsettling transformations in Resident Evil history. The coat comes off, and what's underneath is wrong. Everything about the sleek, almost professional appearance of the first form gets stripped away. The parasite's regeneration has gone into overdrive, producing grotesque masses of exposed tissue and mutated flesh. The humanoid frame is still there, still bipedal, but now you can see exactly what's been hiding under that coat. Twisted musculature, exposed tendons, raw, glistening tissue where skin used to be. It looks like someone peeled the wrapper off a nightmare. The claws become more pronounced, capable of devastating swipes that cover serious distance. Tendrils and fleshy growths erupt across the body, giving the whole thing an organic, almost tumorous appearance. It's not a soldier anymore. It's a walking wound that refuses to die. Here's where it gets interesting, though. That single visible eye? Still there, still locked onto you. And somehow that's worse now because the rest of the face has degraded into something barely recognizable as human, but that eye is still tracking you with the same horrible focus, which is, not ideal. But here's the thing that makes this form so fascinating from a design perspective. The trade-off. The parasite made a desperate survival calculation, and the math was brutal. Sacrifice intelligence for raw lethality. Sacrifice tactical flexibility for overwhelming physical power. The rocket launcher? Gone. The ability to strategically track and corner prey through the city? Gone. The creature that once hunted you like a professional assassin now charges at you with reckless aggression. All brute strength and speed and zero finesse. It's simultaneously the most physically dangerous and least psychologically scary version of Nemesis. The first form had you checking every corridor, listening for footsteps, dreading the moment it appeared with a rocket launcher aimed at your face. This form just rushes you. Terrifying in the moment, sure, but it's predictable. It doesn't think the way it used to. It doesn't plan. It doesn't say stars in that horrible broken voice. It just attacks whatever's closest and hopes that's enough. And honestly, for most things in Raccoon City, it absolutely would be enough. Its claws can tear through just about anything you'd care to hide behind. The regeneration that was already absurd in the first form is now operating without any restraint whatsoever, rebuilding tissue faster than you can destroy it, but it traded its brain for its muscles. And if you think losing intelligence is the worst thing that can happen to Nemesis, wait until you see what the final form sacrifices just to stay alive. Nemesis, T-type, classic final form. So at this point, Nemesis has already lost its coat, its weapons, its intelligence, and basically every shred of anything that once made it look even remotely human. You'd think that would be rock bottom. Turns out no. Rock bottom has a basement, and that basement has a sub-basement, and Nemesis just ate everything in both of them. The classic final form emerges inside the incineration disposal plant P12A, and the way it gets there is genuinely one of the most disturbing transformation mechanics in the entire franchise. After the second form gets dumped into the corrosive chemical environment of the disposal plant, a place specifically designed to dissolve bioweapons as powerful as Tyrants, the creature doesn't die. It adapts. It survives submersion and waste that was engineered to destroy things exactly like it, and instead of dissolving into nothing, it begins consuming everything around it to fuel yet another mutation. Damage doesn't kill this thing. Damage makes it hungrier, which is, not ideal. But here's where it gets truly disgusting. While sitting in this chemical nightmare, Nemesis starts absorbing organic matter from dead zombies and hunters scattered around the disposal facility. It's literally eating other bioweapons and infected remains to fuel its own growth. The NE-alpha parasite has completely abandoned any attempt to maintain a cohesive physical structure. No more bipedal movement, no more quadrupedal movement, no more movement at all in any traditional sense. Instead, the parasite redirects everything toward maximizing raw biomass and tentacular weapon systems through consumption-based mutation. The result is a massive slug-like cocoon that peels open to reveal a room-filling monstrosity with tentacled appendages anchoring its body throughout the entire arena. You're not fighting an enemy anymore. You're standing inside one. The creature essentially becomes a living environment that you have to navigate within the context of its own body. Multiple weak points are spread across this enormous mass, and the tentacle anchoring means traditional movement-based evasion becomes almost useless. You can't outrun something that is the room. it still retains remnants of the previous form's head and exposed jaw structure, just blown up to dramatically enlarged proportions. Multiple rows of teeth line that jaw, each one capable of instantly killing a human through a single bite. The original mission to eliminate STARS members? Completely irrelevant by this point. Whatever program directive once drove this creature has been buried under layers of pure, biological hunger. This isn't a weapon anymore. It's just a mass of consumption and regeneration that happens to be very, very angry. Here's the thing that makes this form genuinely terrifying from a design perspective. Every previous Nemesis mutation traded something for something. The second form lost intelligence but gained speed and raw strength. This final form trades literally everything. Mobility, tactical thinking, even basic structural integrity. For one thing, the inability to die. The parasite's refined biological control systems appear compromised. The rapid recovery that protected earlier stages is degraded, but the sheer volume of biomass and the distributed nature of its body means you can't just shoot it in one spot and call it a day. You have to systematically dismantle something that fills an entire room while it's actively trying to eat you. And remember, this thing survived a disposal system specifically built to destroy creatures like it. So good luck figuring out what actually works, but at least the classic Nemesis stayed confined to a PlayStation. Wait until you hear what Hollywood decided to do with this creature, because the movie version of Nemesis has a backstory that changes absolutely everything about what this monster actually is. Nemesis, Resident Evil Apocalypse movie. Every version of Nemesis we've talked about so far has one thing in common. There's nothing left of whoever that tyrant used to be. The parasite takes over, the human disappears, and what's left is a walking weapons platform with zero emotional complexity. The 2004 film decided to throw all of that out the window and ask a question no Resident Evil game has ever bothered with. What if the monster remembers being a person? In Resident Evil Apocalypse, Nemesis isn't built from some anonymous tyrant. He's Matt Addison, an environmental activist who infiltrated Umbrella's facility in the first film. Matt was one of the good guys. He was trying to expose Umbrella's illegal experiments when an advanced licker scratched him during the hive escape, and Umbrella's scientists immediately seized the opportunity. They captured Matt, pumped him full of T-virus, and spent months accelerating and directing his mutation toward military utility. No NE alpha parasite running the show this time. Just straight T-virus infection and a whole lot of Umbrella's finest poking and prodding until what used to be a man became something that could level a city block, and they gave him the toys to do it. This version of Nemesis, portrayed by actor Matthew G. Taylor, carries dual weaponry that makes the game version look modestly armed. Rocket launcher in one hand, a custom-engineered forearm-mounted railgun modeled after a heavily modified minigun in the other. Producer Paul W.S. Anderson described the concept as Nemesis walking around with a gigantic, powerful weapon in each hand, and almost indecisive as to which one to use, which is honestly a pretty fun mental image. Just a 7-foot mutant standing in the middle of Raccoon City like a guy at a buffet who can't decide between the pasta and the chicken. The design takes a more grounded military approach than the games ever did. His protective coat presumably contains Kevlar, providing resistance against high-caliber weapons, explosions, and extreme heat. It's less parasitic horror experiment and more black-budget super soldier project. Umbrella didn't want a monster here. They wanted a controllable asset, which is, not ideal when your controllable asset used to be a human being with strong opinions about your company. Here's where it gets complicated. During combat with Alice, Matt starts waking up. Not fully, not all at once, but gradually. Flashes of recognition, moments of hesitation that shouldn't exist in something Umbrella programmed to kill on command. He begins regaining consciousness and awareness of who he used to be, which is something that has never happened in any game version of Nemesis. Not once. The parasite in the games doesn't leave room for that, but the film's version, built on T-virus mutation rather than parasitic brain replacement, apparently left just enough of Matt Addison intact for him to claw his way back to the surface. And then he makes a choice. In the film's climax, with Umbrella attack helicopters bearing down on Alice, the partially conscious Nemesis turns on his creators. He destroys one of the helicopters, protecting the woman he was programmed to kill, and sacrifices himself in the process. A creature designed to be the ultimate weapon decides, in its final moments, to be a person again. It's a fundamentally optimistic take on a character every other version treats as pure monster. The games never give Nemesis a shred of humanity. He's a tool, a biological missile pointed at STARS members. But the film says, no, actually, there's someone in there, and given enough time and enough pain, that someone can fight back. Whether you think that's a beautiful addition to the Nemesis mythology, or a complete betrayal of what makes the creature terrifying, probably depends on how you feel about Paul W.S. Anderson movies in general. I don't know what to tell you, but if you thought translating Nemesis into a movie was a wild creative choice, wait until you see what happened when they dropped him into a fighting game. Nemesis, Marvel vs. Capcom variant? So what happens when you take an unstoppable bioweapon designed to hunt down elite police officers and drop it into a fighting game where it has to play fair? You get the most nerfed version of Nemesis in existence. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious. Nemesis shows up as a playable character in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and later in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. In both games, he's classified as a big body grappler, which is fighting game speak for huge, slow, hits like a freight train, and gets comboed into oblivion by anyone with a dash. He's got 1,150,000 HP, which sounds massive until you realize that ties him with She-Hulk for 5th place in the game. Fifth, the creature that canonically survives rocket launchers, acid baths, and a literal railgun to the face shares a health tier with She-Hulk. He was originally designed to have the highest vitality in the entire roster, but somewhere during development, that got quietly walked back. Nobody is safe, but here's where the design gets genuinely clever. His signature hyper combo, Bioweapon Assault, transforms Nemesis into a grotesque super form covered in tentacles and tumors. The developers essentially compressed the creature's entire 3-stage mutation arc into a single special attack animation. Every horrifying transformation you witness across the entirety of Resident Evil 3, from humanoid stalker to quadrupedal nightmare to room-sized blob monster, gets condensed into one move that lasts about 4 seconds. Hey, remember those 3 boss fights that traumatized you? Here they are in one combo. You're welcome. And the damage output is no joke. A level 3 X-Factor enhanced bioweapon assault can destroy roughly half of Super Skrull's total health pool in a single application. Half, from one move. A character with the combined powers of the entire Fantastic Four just watches his life bar evaporate because a zombie in a trench coat decided to grow some tumors at him, which is, not ideal. The rocket launcher translates into special moves that work surprisingly well within fighting game mechanics. You can hit standing opponents from full screen, carry downed opponents off the ground for combo extensions, and combined with a ground dash that's deceptively fast for his size, Nemesis can actually apply real pressure. He's not just standing there waiting to get jumped on, he's standing there with a rocket launcher waiting to get jumped on. Big difference. In competitive play, Nemesis typically operates as a point or second character. His clothesline rocket assist provides significant combo extension for teammates, and his team hyper combo version of Bioweapon Assault generates a forced ground bounce that lets the point character extend combos beyond what they'd normally pull off. He's basically a 7-foot tall support character. Somewhere, Umbrella is furious. Here's the thing, this is probably the most balanced interpretation of Nemesis across any media. His canonical power has been deliberately constrained to fit competitive fighting game design. He can't walk through attacks indefinitely. He can't regenerate mid-round. He can't chase you across the entire map while muttering stars into the void. He has to take turns. He has to respect frame data. He has to lose to Phoenix Wright if the Phoenix Wright player is good enough. And in a weird way, that captures something true about the character. Nemesis was never an independent force of nature. He was always a tool, a weapon deployed for a specific purpose. In Resident Evil, that purpose was eliminating STARS members. In Marvel vs. Capcom, that purpose is landing a command grab and doing 40% of someone's health bar in one combo. Same energy, different context. But if you think competitive balance is the biggest change Nemesis has ever undergone, wait until you see what Capcom did when they rebuilt him from scratch for the Resident Evil 3 remake. Because that version doesn't just look different, it fights different, acts different, and mutates into something the original never even attempted. Nemesis T-Type? Remake first form. Here's where Capcom decided to throw the entire design philosophy out the window and start fresh. The 1999 Nemesis was unsettling because it looked almost human. The 2020 remake Nemesis is unsettling because it looks like something that crawled out of a medical waste bin. And honestly, both approaches work, but the remake version hits different. When you first encounter the redesigned Nemesis in the 2020 remake, you don't actually see it. Not really. The creature is wrapped entirely in black, body bag-like material that obscures every single physical detail. You know something horrible is underneath. You can hear it. You can feel the weight of it chasing you through Raccoon City. But Capcom makes you wait before they show you the goods. That's brilliant horror pacing. The anticipation of the reveal does more psychological damage than the reveal itself. You're essentially running from a giant trash bag with murder on its mind. And somehow that's terrifying, but then the covering comes off, and you wish it hadn't. The redesigned face is where the remake really separates itself from the original. The teeth are the first thing you notice. Massive, elongated, with extreme gum exposure that makes the creature look like it's permanently snarling. The skull has physically expanded due to the NE alpha parasite's regenerative boost, and that bone growth has literally ripped through the surrounding facial flesh. The nose is twisted at an unnatural angle, shoved aside by a skull that's outgrowing its own skin. Where the original Nemesis had stitched, almost surgical modifications that suggested someone carefully constructed this thing, the remake version looks like the parasite is winning a war against the host body in real time. Tendrils and partial parasite exposure along the shoulder area peek through the remaining covering, immediately telling you everything you need to know about what's happening inside this creature without a single line of dialogue. Here's where it gets really interesting though. The remake Nemesis can do something the original never could. It can implant NE alpha parasites directly into other zombies, creating subordinate creatures that fight alongside it. This fundamentally changes what Nemesis is as a threat. The 1999 version was a lone Terminator. One target, one mission, relentless pursuit. The 2020 version is a spawning entity. It doesn't just chase you, it makes the things around you worse. Every zombie in the area becomes a potential upgrade waiting to happen. You're not just running from Nemesis anymore. You're running from the idea that Nemesis can turn your environment against you. The aggression is cranked up significantly too. The remake structures its entire campaign around more frequent Nemesis encounters, making the creature feel genuinely relentless in a way the original only hinted at. And the arsenal has expanded. Flamethrowers, rocket launchers, weapons that weren't prominently featured in the 1999 gameplay. The original Nemesis had its iconic rocket launcher, and that was mostly it. The remake version walks around like it raided an Umbrella armory on the way out, which, you know, is not ideal for anyone trying to survive. The whole design philosophy boils down to one shift. The 1999 Nemesis said, "What if a tyrant was smart enough to use weapons and track you?" The 2020 Nemesis says, "What if a tyrant was actively decomposing, angry about it, and could also make more monsters?" Both are horrifying, but the remake version feels less like a precision instrument and more like a biological disaster that someone pointed in your general direction and hoped for the best. But if you think the first form is bad, wait until the remake strips away what little humanity this thing has left. Nemesis T-Type Remake Second Form. Most creatures in video games have the decency to get weaker when you blow their limbs off. Nemesis looked at that convention and said, absolutely not. Following enough environmental damage to destroy the protective coat and destabilize the humanoid form entirely, the remake's Nemesis undergoes a forced mutation that essentially rebuilds its skeleton from scratch. The creature's entire architecture reorganizes to support exclusively quadrupedal movement, similar to a large predatory animal. And when I say the redesign is aggressive, I mean the remake version looks almost completely alien compared to the original second form. The classic version, at least, maintained a vaguely recognizable head structure. You could squint and still see something that used to be human in there. The remake abandons any pretense of corrupted humanoid identity. It's just gone. Whatever this thing is now, it has zero interest in reminding you it was once a person. The bone structure undergoes heavy alteration, and the ribcage literally opens up to reveal a glowing internal organ at the creature's core. Whether that's the heart or the NE alpha parasite itself is up for debate. But here's the thing. It doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is what it communicates to the player. That glow is the game telling you you can hurt this thing. It's a visible weak point nested inside an otherwise overwhelming wall of muscle and claw and fury. Smart horror design, honestly, and give the player hope and terror in the same visual. The creature also develops massive claws and elongated tentacles that extend from its mutated body, which is already bad enough. But here's where it gets genuinely ridiculous. Those tentacles aren't just decoration. Nemesis uses them as active weapons, lashing out with reach and speed that a quadrupedal frame shouldn't be able to produce. The thing turned its own parasitic mutations into offensive tools. It's not falling apart, it's upgrading in real time. Every mutation that should be a weakness becomes something else it can hit you with. I don't know what to tell you, but the real shift in the remake's second form isn't just visual, it's mechanical. The clock tower encounter perfectly demonstrates what the developers were going for. Conventional weaponry provides minimal actual damage against this thing. You can empty every round you've got into it and accomplish roughly nothing. The fight design essentially prevents direct combat victory entirely. Instead, you need to stun Nemesis using mine rounds from the grenade launcher, knocking it down long enough to expose that glowing weak point and actually deal real damage. The message is clear either way. Your standard firearms aren't solving this problem, and that's the brilliance of pairing the glowing weak point with the mine round mechanic. One says you can hurt this thing, the other says, but not with your guns, not the way you want to. The game gives you a target and then immediately restricts how you're allowed to hit it. You're not fighting Nemesis in this encounter, you're solving Nemesis. It's a puzzle wearing claws. The original second form was scary because it got bigger and angrier and faster. The remake second form is scary because it stopped being something you could categorize. It's not a corrupted human anymore. It's not even a recognizable monster type. It's something entirely new, built from the ground up by a parasite that ran out of ways to fix what was broken and decided to just start over with a completely different blueprint, which is, not ideal when you're the person standing in the room with it. But if you think a quadrupedal nightmare that weaponizes its own parasitic mutations is as bad as it gets, wait until you see what happens when this thing stops holding back entirely. Nemesis T-Type, Remake Final Form. This is where everything Umbrella built finally collapses under its own weight, and I mean that literally. After being doused in chemicals and consuming massive quantities of organic biomass, including the corpses of dead T-103 Tyrants, the Nemesis enters a gigantic slug-like cocoon. And when that cocoon opens, what comes out isn't a creature anymore. It's a room. The thing has become a room-encompassing biological monstrosity that bears almost zero structural similarity to the humanoid figure that once chased Jill Valentine through the streets of Raccoon City, wearing what looked like a trash bag. The head region splits open like a massive blooming flower made of meat, revealing internal structures of genuinely nightmarish proportions. Web-like tendrils anchor the body directly into the surrounding architecture, fusing the creature with the walls, the floor, the ceiling. You're not fighting Nemesis at this point. You're standing inside it. Here's the thing. The NE Alpha parasite has completely given up. Not in the way you'd expect, though. It hasn't died or failed. It's given up on maintaining a cohesive organism. The parasite has abandoned every structural principle it ever followed and gone all in on maximizing sheer biomass and regenerative capacity. Individual body portions can regenerate independently from each other, while the overall mass just keeps expanding based on damage taken and organic material consumed. Shoot it and it grows. Hurt it and it adapts. It's like trying to fight a tumor that gets stronger every time you hit it with chemotherapy, which is, not ideal, and conventional weapons, completely meaningless. The game mechanically forces you to use the experimental electromagnetic gun called Finger, because nothing else does substantial damage. Your entire arsenal of shotguns, grenades, pistols, all of it might as well be confetti. The only thing that actually hurts this creature is a prototype railgun that Umbrella probably never intended anyone to actually need. But here we are. The fight itself keeps evolving as you're in it. The creature spawns additional pustule-like weak points across its body as the battle progresses, which sounds helpful until you realize it's constantly shifting which ones are exposed and which ones are protected behind physical barriers it manifests over vulnerable spots. So you can't just memorize a pattern and execute. You have to keep reassessing, keep repositioning, keep timing your shots between defensive posture shifts, while this thing is actively trying to dissolve you with acid attacks from across the arena. Cool, that's also a thing that happened, but here's where it gets genuinely unsettling, and not in the, oh no, a big monster way, in the existential horror way. Think about what Nemesis was built to do. It had one job: eliminate STARS members. That was the entire reason Umbrella created it. The NE Alpha parasite was implanted, the T-103 host was selected, the weapons were provided, the coat was fitted, and it was dropped into Raccoon City with a single program directive: kill Jill Valentine and every other STARS operative it could find. By this final form, that mission doesn't exist anymore. Not because it was completed, not because it failed, because the creature has mutated so far beyond its original purpose that the concept of mission has become biologically irrelevant. The parasite won the war for control over the host body. It achieved total dominance, but what it won is nothing. There's no intelligence left to execute orders. There's no humanoid structure left to wield weapons. There's no tactical awareness left to track targets. There's just mass, expanding, regenerating, consuming mass with no direction and no endpoint. The weapon outgrew its mission, and that's the real horror of Nemesis. Not that it's powerful. Every Resident Evil boss is powerful. The horror is that all of that power has no purpose left. It's a billion-dollar bioweapon that has become nothing more than a spreading stain on the floor of a disposal plant. By eating eating dead things and getting bigger for absolutely no reason. Umbrella's greatest achievement in parasitic bioengineering reduced to a mindless growth that doesn't even remember the name it used to scream. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.